H6.
I'm sorry, I think that Prince Andrew has long been available to the highest bidder.
Of course he has.
He's an absolute embarrassment.
He
think I've got some big question marks about the king and those carrier bags as well.
Yeah,
I'm sorry, but way back when that all got dropped when he became king, but it's still a big issue. Going to talk about Keir Starmer's surrender squad. He does not believe that Britain can survive outside the EU. I mean, all of that.
Shocking stuff.
Starmer, worst prime minister in modern day history. I mean, tell us something we don't know.
Well, I said he's gone to Norway because he's found a bloke who's even more insignificant than he is. He's the only one in the world. Anyway, Julia's next. I'll see you tomorrow at 6, hopefully.
The UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
A very, very good morning to you. This is Talk, the home of common sense, with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer, and my cough and my cold, which I've spread to everyone in the office. Sorry, guys, and the whole family, and even poor Sam Armstrong, who's a commentator who's joining us today. I gave this to you last week, so polls.
Yeah, thanks for that. Not a drop of sleep last night. Yeah.
We just struggle through it. I tell you what, if you want to just call in today, you can just host the show. That's fine. We are if you can get into the office, we're at London Bridge. If you can just get in, come in, host the show, not a problem. We're happy to have you. But listen, we'll see how long we can go. But it's great to have your company, whether you're poorly or not. There's a lot of lurgies going around at the moment. It is great to have your company. Whether you're listening on DAB Plus radio or on your smart speaker, watching on YouTube or on your connected device, it is lovely to have you join us. Now, so much to talk about in the next 3 hours, up till 1 o'clock, depending on whether it's us or our lovely audience turn up to host. I'm not even joking about that, seriously. Turn up, please. Obviously going to talk about Prince Andrew and the Chinese spy, who we can't name because of a court order, even though he's being named across everywhere else in the world. Oh, and including in China after being banned from this country for being a spy. H6 is his name. But it was revealed that the Duke of York had close business ties with this man, now known to be a Chinese spy, banned from the country. Prince Andrew being urged to voluntarily withdraw himself from public view, not joining the family at Sandringham Christmas and the like. But this goes far, far deeper than simply a royal who's got yet another inappropriate, unsavoury friend, because, hey, Prince Andrew's no stranger to that, is he? We're going to talk about all of that throughout the show, but also with former Security Minister Tom Tugendhat in just a couple of moments. Also going to talk about Europe, and we know Keir Starmer spent 3 years from 2016 trying to stop us from Brexiting, despite that clear democratic vote for us to leave the EU. Well, guess what? Now he's set up what's been dubbed a surrender squad by Lord Frost of more than 100 civil servants who are basically ready to scrap Brexit and have closer EU ties. This comes after the PM has been talking about a reset in relations with Brussels since entering number 10. He is desperate to take us back into the EU by hook or by crook. Even if we're not in officially, we're going to be taking their rules. So I want to hear from you about that today. Also, the damning new poll that's found that voters believe that Keir Starmer is the worst Prime Minister in modern history after just 5 months in the job. I mean, I don't think anyone's surprised by that, are you? And, of course, Channel migrant boats back in the news, as we've seen that. A big number of people coming across. It's December, for goodness sake. Still hundreds making it across this weekend. Home Secretary Yvette Cooper, though, has refused to set a timetable, set any date for reducing small boat arrivals, despite admitting that current levels are far too high. Hey, it's a major achievement that they admit that, isn't it? Anyway, all of that is coming up. I particularly want to hear from you today on the issue of Keir Starmer basically setting up a surrender squad of 100 civil servants ready to undo Brexit and create closer ties with the EU. What is your reaction to that? Bear in mind, of course, that, as Lord Frost points out, he was our chief negotiator under Boris Johnson on Brexit, that actually he didn't have 100 civil servants, and certainly not more than 100 civil servants, when he was actually trying to negotiate Brexit. So why does Keir Starmer need that many? What is the secret plan? Do you trust him on Brexit? What is your view on that? Give us a call, 0344 499 1000. You can text the word talk and your message to 87222. You can send us a message on X at Talk TV. Calls are charged at the national rate. Text costs £1, standard network rate message. To say, just a couple of moments, going to talk to Tom Tugendhat about this Chinese spy story. But quick word from you, Sam Armstrong, on the issue of Brexit. Now, I don't trust Keir Starmer as far as I can throw him on Brexit. He's proven himself not to be a Democrat. Same with the Lib Dems, same with most of the Labour Party. He only agreed to it when basically 2019 they lost and Boris got his 80-strong majority to get Brexit done. Do you think the Labour Party are going to try and take us back in?
I do, unfortunately. Look, the EU have been really clear. If we want to have so-called closer ties with them, if we want to trade more, if we want to have easier access, we have to go back to how things were before, where we signed up to take the rules and not have a say in how they're made. And we know that there's great parts of Europe, France in particular, that is still hell-bent on punishing us for making that democratic decision, which they consider to be a massive totemic affront to them.
Yeah, absolutely. It is personal, isn't it? Again, if being in the EU is so great, A, no one would want to leave, and B, you wouldn't have to punish people for leaving, because leaving itself would be punishment enough, surely. So why do they want to stop other people feeling that it might be a better option? Always wondered. Do give us a call, 0344 499 1000. No doubt I'm going to get your calls on my next topic as well. Let's talk about the Chinese spy, who is definitely out in the cold with Prince Andrew, his big close confidant, as one of Prince Andrew's staff called him, also being told he's going to be left out in the cold at Christmas Day because, frankly, King Charles and other Buckingham Palace folk aren't that keen on being seen with Prince Andrew in public after the latest scandal involving him. But let's talk about this and the much wider, much more important implications of this with former Security Minister, Conservative MP Tom Tugendhat. A very good morning to you, Tom.
Morning, Julia. How are you?
Very well indeed. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Now, you, of course, one of the number of MPs who have actually been sanctioned by China over your criticism, quite rightly, of Chinese behaviour over recent years. This story has really come to the headlines because of Prince Andrew's close links. Prince Andrew, as we know, has many a questionable friendship and confidant, Jeffrey Epstein being the least, the worst of them all, but this is certainly not the least when it comes to national security. Now we know that this alleged spy, banned from the country because of his allegations, known only to us as H6, managed to meet up with David Cameron as Prime Minister, Theresa May as Prime Minister, went to Buckingham Palace, Windsor Castle, other places. Close links for some 10 years with Prince Andrew. How concerned are you about what access this spy had to possible state secrets?
Well, that's exactly the point, isn't it, Julia? The reality is it's not actually just about one individual, or whether that be this particular H6 or whether it's Prince Andrew. It's about the pattern of activity we're seeing coming out of the Chinese Communist Party over many years. And you've been very kind in giving me space to explain this on your show over many years, that this is something that I've seen rising for over a decade now. Because what we're seeing Chinese influence operations, Chinese espionage operations, trying to change the way our debate is conducted in the United Kingdom, trying to steal secrets off companies, which mean that they go out of business as their products are made overseas in China, and indeed how we're seeing the debate in the United Kingdom change, whether that's in academic or, in fact, in some cases, in journalism as well. So this is part of a much wider thing, and that's exactly why when I was Security Minister, I tried to introduce, or in fact I did introduce, forgive me, the Foreign Influence Registration Scheme, which should have been live by now, but sadly the election came a little bit earlier than I was expecting, and so I wasn't able to get it done before the election, but frankly it was all ready to go and it should be introduced immediately.
And what would that do?
Well, it would create effectively an environment in which people had to register, and MI5 were very, very keen for it, because it wouldn't give them the answer, as it were, as to who is a spy and who isn't, but it would create the haystack in which you can find the needle, if you see what I mean. If you want to find a needle in a haystack, first you need a haystack, and this would have built up that haystack. So the level of information that was so important to making sure that we're actually properly protected and properly able to understand the kind of threats against us. So in a circumstance like this, we'd have seen a pattern of activity, we'd have seen the individual either registering in multiple different areas in ways that would be concerning, or not registering and therefore committing a criminal offence.
Yeah, I mean, this is the thing about China, is that we're much clearer about our relationship with Russia. They are a hostile enemy state, effectively. I mean, you know, we are supplying Ukraine with weaponry to hit Russia after their invasion. And yet very, very confused about our relationship with China, largely because, let's face it, we have such a strong economic relationship, as every country in the West does. But China are using their influence, it's not just about sort of gaining a bit of commercial foothold, is it? This is about reaping massive economic power over the world. They're buying up all of the crucial metals. They are basically making every single country in the West and in the developing world sort of dependent on their largesse. They want to have political power when it comes to, where is Europe going to side if and when there is an invasion of Taiwan or anything else, with the US or with China. This is about a long-term political goal for sort of economic dominance of the world. Now, bearing in mind this is a murderous, tyrannical, totalitarian state. It's a police state. It operates in a completely different way from the West. It is extraordinary that we still have our leaders like, Keir Starmer, the first British Prime Minister in quite some years, kowtowing to the Chinese and treating them as if they are a normal Western democracy when they are anything but, and their intentions are anything but good. Why are so many political leaders, academic leaders, media figures, so many influential people in the West, why are they on their knees, prostrating themselves before China?
Well, Julia, you're explaining very clearly the problem, and you're going to get yourself sanctioned because for saying things like that.
Not a country. Again, I would love to go to China. I would not feel safe there anymore. I wouldn't think I would be safe.
I'm afraid that's the reality. I was sanctioned for saying exactly what you're saying. I was sanctioned for pointing out that China is violating the human rights of Chinese citizens. I mean, I would have thought that was supporting the Chinese people, not opposing them. And I'm I think it's deeply sad that we see this level of aggression towards the Chinese people by the Chinese Communist Party. And that's the real problem. What we need to be doing in the United Kingdom, it's not for us to determine the policies of the Chinese state within China, but it is for us to protect the British people. And that's why I'm really concerned, not just at the failure to introduce the first scheme, which frankly is reckless not to have it in place already, but also for the discussion that they've opened up on the embassy. Now, Julia, we've spoken about it in the past. There's this idea of having a super embassy in near Tower Hill in the City of London. And this would be a massive platform for Chinese intelligence gathering in London, effectively a base for the United Front Work Department. And it's already been listed as a security challenge or threat by various different agencies in the United Kingdom. Now, it's been refused by the council, but the government has decided to call it in. Now, I'm particularly concerned about this because you watched, as I did, the videos of Keir Starmer with Xi Jinping, Chairman Xi, in the G20 in Brazil. And there was a moment there where they were beginning to do that sort of piece that leaders often do for camera. But the moment that Keir Starmer raised Jimmy Lai, a British citizen who's been illegally detained in Hong Kong, the Chinese officials pushed out the journalists. Now, that may be normal in China, but it shouldn't be something the British Prime Minister tolerates.
Exactly. And they do. And again, there's this whole, we don't want to offend the Chinese because we rely on them and so much investment. But this is where it goes. And we're seeing, of course, the massive influence in universities as well. Huge amounts of money being pumped in. And that kind of affects the sort of research, affects what's being said, affects the advice that the government gets. I think this is so insidious. I find it absolutely extraordinary that people haven't woken up to it.
Let's just talk about the academic thing for a moment, because there's been, obviously, as you would expect, there's been various different academics who've been silenced because of their comments about Tibet or about Xinjiang. And you may say that you understand that. But there are others who are being silenced because they've spoken up about demographics or about geography or about environmental policies. Now, these are really important policies for the United Kingdom. And if we can't debate them as a free country in our own university, then frankly, that's not just interfering with Chinese policy. It's interfering with British policy. Now, that is much more serious. And it is the job of our government, and I certainly did when I was Security Minister, is to protect the British people and to protect British freedoms. That is what I will always do. And I'm afraid I am concerned at the moment that we're not doing that as aggressively as we should be.
Well, indeed. Let's bring it back to Prince Andrew, though, because there's, a lot of talk that Prince Andrew has a number of unsavoury confidants and friends. There isn't a questionable dictator with a lot of money that he doesn't want to glad hand, and he always claims he was doing it as our UK trade envoy, but actually a lot of the time it's rather personally useful to him, as we've seen what's been emerged in terms of his relationships with Epstein and others. Was Prince Andrew just a useful idiot, and how dangerous is it to have somebody who is always desperately in need of cash, we understand, being so close to power and have such access to so many important people, taking people to Buckingham Palace and the like, to be basically able to use effectively, the British royal family name to glad hand with people who could then turn out to be spies?
Well, look, I can see why the Chinese state targeted him, but I think we should be realistic that Prince Andrew doesn't have access to intelligence. It's not really about him. And this isn't specifically, frankly, him who's the threat. The reality is it's about the level of attacks that we're seeing against the whole of the United Kingdom. And, the reality is we've seen individuals connected to the United Front Work Department, in Parliament, we've seen them in government, we've seen them in academic circles, in journalism and business and so on. Because the reality is we're dealing with a very, very major plan by the Chinese Communist Party. This isn't a specific targeted operation. This isn't some sort of James Bond style, individual action. This is much broader than that. And if we focus, forgive me, Julia, but if we focus too much on the Prince Andrew aspect, which I understand, and I get why it's interesting, we miss the wider theme, which is this is about the whole of government threat.
This is just the sort of the big name that is attached to this story as opposed to the whole story. Just finally, MPs from Reform UK are threatening to use parliamentary privilege in the House of Commons today to name this spy. H6 is the only way we're allowed to refer to him in the UK due to a British court order, even though he's named not only around the world on the internet, he's also named in China. It's absurd that we should have so much control over this information. We should know this man's name, should we not? Would you support MPs naming him in Parliament, and would you do so yourself?
Julia, look, I'm not going to tell other MPs what to do. I wouldn't do it because I am a Democrat. I believe in the rule of law and I respect the British courts, even when I disagree with them, as I have done quite frequently over issues of a similar nature to this. And I'm not going to name him either because when I was the security minister, I promised to keep the King's secrets, and it's a promise I intend to keep.
You would be breaking the Official Secrets Act at that point.
Well, I'm not going to get into discussions of what I may or may not have known as security minister. You'll understand that. I know you will. But look, I'm not going to be critical of others. But there is a danger again here that we over-focus on the individual and miss the theme. So let's not pretend that this is a one-off. And, by identifying him, suddenly, we've uncovered some enormous network. No. He is merely the tip of the iceberg. Prince Andrew is merely the tip of the iceberg. They're not, if you like, they're not the story. They're an example of the story.
Right. Very, very interesting to talk to you. Tom Tugendhat, former Security Minister, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Let's bring Sam Armstrong back in on this. I mean, again, the Prince Andrew side of this is what's been making the headlines for the past 3 or 4 days, and a lot of focus today on Prince Andrew being told, could you please not turn up and do the walk with the family on Christmas Day? And frankly, for most of us, whether or not Prince Andrew is walking with his brother and his nieces and nephews is frankly neither here nor there for most of us, although many people might care strongly about it. But it is another embarrassment for the royal family that he constantly gets himself into these difficulties. But Tom Tugendhat is right, isn't he? That this isn't the big story. The real story is that this is happening on a grand scale, and this is just proof of just how far Chinese tentacles reach into the British establishment. How worried should we be, Sam?
I think very worried indeed. I mean, look, Andrew is clearly a bad, but with him, you kind of got to pick your poison. You can either pick the paedophile friend or the hostile spy friend. I mean, it's really that bad.
Oh, and some very questionable, Middle East potentates as well.
Yeah, and I think the British people would like more than one degree of separation between those people and our sovereign, not unreasonably so. But look, on the Chinese question, it's just unbelievable how much this man was getting up to over so long a time. And we saw today in the Telegraph that he was also setting up British private schools, campuses out there in China. Like his intelligence activities extended to our children. Yeah, our children.
Well, now, we know Chinese intelligence extends to that because that's what TikTok is.
Well, precisely so. And this is not a regime that has our best interests at heart. Yeah. It doesn't want to coexist alongside the West. It wants to replace the West. Yeah. It would like to restore the Chinese empire. President Xi talks of a century of humiliation over the last 100 years where they're no longer ruling half of Asia. And he won't stop there if he has his chance. And you only have to look at who he's cavorting with on the global stage. President Putin, the Ayatollahs in Iran, North Korea, etc. There is an axis of evil aligning against us, and the longer it takes us to wake up to it, the more painful it's going to be to cut it out. Yeah,
I just find it absolutely extraordinary how many people have got their heads in the sand, but people who frankly are in a position to know an awful lot better than they do. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. For goodness sake, if you do call on this, do not name the Chinese spy. We'll get us all in a whole heap of legal trouble, and yourself, and probably in court as well. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. How big an issue is this? How big a concern is this? Is it just about Prince Andrew for you, embarrassing the King once again, or is this about, as Tom Tugendhat and we are saying, just the tip of the iceberg of what China is doing on the international stage? Do you give us a call on this, 0344 499 1000. Also, lots of calls already lined up on the threat to Brexit. Keir Starmer has set up a surrender squad. That's what it's been dubbed by the former chief Brexit negotiator, Lord Frost, and echoed by Boris Johnson, the man who did, for all his faults, deliver Brexit for us. It set up a surrender squad of more than 100 civil servants ready to basically undo Brexit and create closer ties with the EU. Happy to have closer ties, but if we're a rule taker, in what way are we free of the EU? Give us a call. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. This is Talk.
Most of the country have been hoodwinked through rhetoric for those 53 years to believe that we can solve the problems that we undoubtedly have in society. And remember that Scotland has the highest drug deaths in Europe. So I'm not being flippant here in any shape or form. That it's a serious problem that needs to be dealt with. And the Misuse of Drugs Act, prohibition and enforcement are never going to do that. In fact, they're part of the problem rather than part of the solution.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
This is Talk, the home of common sense, with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. Also joining me is commentator Sam Armstrong, and also joining you and all of us are our lurgies. It's basically my fault. I've made the whole office ill. I like to point out that my husband gave this to me, so it's actually my husband's fault. So could you blame him for the throat? Anyway, just some breaking news in the last 10 minutes or so. The sale of Royal Mail has been confirmed, £5.3 billion. I'm amazed it's worth that much, frankly, to the Czech billionaire Daniel Kretinsky. It's been approved by the government. His company, EP Group, is going to buy the Postal Service's parent company, International Distribution Services. Basically, it's been agreed back in May, but it was subject to a government review on the national security laws. We've just been talking about national security with China. Royal Mail's headquarters, tax base and corporate structure will remain British for 5 years under the legally binding agreement, and the universal service obligation to deliver letters to every address in the UK 6 days a week at a uniform price will also remain indefinitely, and the government retains a golden share, requiring it to approve any major changes. You happy about this, Sam? The Royal Mail going off to a foreign purchaser?
I'm not really, if I'm honest. It seems like a sad moment and an indictment of what's happened to great chunks of the British economy. Of course, it's free market, and it's long ago been privatised, and it was held by pension funds all around the world, etc., etc. But it does seem to have reached the point now where almost no great British business is owned in this country.
But what I don't understand is that if a foreign billionaire wants to, he's ranked, I think, the Sunday Times Rich list, he's ranked 33rd in the country, estimated net worth of £6 billion. For him personally, if it's worth something, if Royal Mail is worth something that's worth buying it for 5.3 billion, why? I don't know why it's for sale if it's worth something. I mean, why doesn't the state just own it and make a profit on it and give that money back to the taxpayers?
Well, the truth is the state sold it off long ago, and it's now been in commercial shareholder hands, going round and round. Look,
and how's that working out? I mean, the last time I sent a birthday card, I left a week's notice to make sure it still arrived too late for a family member's birthday. I
think the truth is that some elements of services that were privatised by the Thatcher government and beyond under Blair possibly were, when we look back, a little bit of a mistake.
Well, as a general rule, if it's a natural monopoly or there's a requirement, and basically they can't make a profit because they have to deliver to the far end of nowhere on a Scottish island for the same price as delivering to a house next door to the sorting office.
Although the section of the business that now does make money is the parcels, which is the commercial, more business side of things, where you've obviously got a number of other big name delivery services that will come and also throw you a parcel.
Your reaction to that, always welcome. Give us a call, 0344 499 1000. If you work for Royal Mail as well, it'd be interesting to hear from you on that. Let's go to our calls, though, about Europe and the surrender squad, as has been dubbed by Lord Frost, the former chief Brexit negotiator. Keir Starmer set up a surrender squad, he says, of 100 civil servants ready to undo Brexit and create closer ties with the EU. What is your reaction to that? 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. Claire is on the line. She's in the Wirral. Hello, Claire.
Hello, Julia.
Good morning. How are you?
Good morning. I'm okay. I've started on the Baileys early.
Wow.
I mean, this country is driving me to it, I'm afraid. So, maybe a bottle of that, will do the whole of the country good. So, I'm doing a bit of advertising, I'm afraid.
Other liqueurs are available.
Oh, yeah. But, I mean, with Starmer, I knew that he was going to sell this country back into Europe. And everything that he said, whether it's to the taxpayers, the pensioners, the farmers, it's all been lies. Yeah. So he's just a liar, and he's a vile man, and he's a very dangerous man, in my opinion.
Well, he's definitely not a Democrat. We know that from what he did as Shadow Brexit Secretary for 2016 to 2019. And he basically spent his entire time trying to get a second referendum before the first one was enacted. That's like me saying, oh, I didn't like the results of the general election. I'll just I'll say we have to have another general election immediately. No Labour government can form itself because I'm not happy with the outcome. I mean, that's not being a Democrat.
It's totally against the democratic vote, and he wanted another referendum. And of course the media did a big job of vilifying the whole thing with the referendum. Boris tried to get the referendum through, but I think that he was sold out by the civil servants, basically.
And Theresa May. I mean, Theresa May tied his... When everyone complains about Boris Johnson's Brexit deal, Theresa May had already tied his hands by agreeing to all of the basic negotiations from the EU. But his hands were tied at that point.
Yeah, so we haven't really had a proper Brexit, which, considering we haven't, and the economy was kind of getting better, under the Tories, although I'm not standing up for the Tories in any way. In other ways, but we were doing okay considering we didn't have a really good deal. And but I know we're going to go right back into it, but we're going back into a Europe that is basically bust.
Yeah, I know. I don't know why they think that our future lies in Europe. France and Germany are basket cases economically.
Well, to sort of put a funny slant on it, I would be surprised if Europe wants to get back in with us. Because they're going to, we're going to put them even into more deficit.
Well, no, because Keir Starmer, look, he won't be able to actually put us back in. What he'll do is he'll give us the worst of both worlds, where we'll be the rule taker, but we won't have, and we'll probably have to pay for the privilege. And I mean, France and Germany are demanding free movement of young people. I mean, those are the very people who move and come here to work. And I mean, this is basically so middle-class Labour voters can send their kids to France and Italy on a gap year. I mean, that's genuinely, as far as I'm concerned, all their only concern. Do you think we'd ever actually go back into you? Do you think if there was a vote now that people would vote to go back in?
I think they probably would, just because of the the way that the whole thing about Brexit has been sort of vilified. And I don't really think a lot of people are that political. They just kind of, they're
getting on with their lives.
They're trying to get on with their lives, and they think anything is better than this.
Yeah, that is true. Well, we've seen that poll on where we are. Keir Starmer, the worst Prime Minister in modern history, according to a poll. I have to say that I've never regretted for a nanosecond my vote for Brexit. And every single thing that has happened since, every single thing that Brussels has done, France has done, every single thing has absolutely convinced me it was the best thing we could ever have done. Never, ever for a nanosecond have I questioned it. I would vote 1,000,000 times a day to Brexit every single time. Claire, you keep on with the Baileys. Bit early on a Monday morning, but Claire is in the Wirral. Thank you very much indeed. 10:33 is the time. I'm going to take a quick break. Then we're going to hear from George Pascoe Watson. I'm going to take more of your calls as well, and more from Sam Armstrong. Lots more to talk about, including that poll, including Vet Cooper refusing to set a timetable for cutting dangerous small boat crossings, a possible rethink on non-crime hate incidents, and the convicted terrorist suing a pub for its deeply offensive pub name and sign. Yes, really, this is Talk. We are the home of common sense.
across the UK. On DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile. The home of common sense. This is Talk.
Very good morning. This is Talk, the home of common sense, with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. 10:36 is the time. Let's join now George Pascoe-Watson. He's former political editor of The Sun. Very good morning to you, George.
Good morning, Julia. Hi.
Thank you very much indeed for joining us. I must ask you, first of all, I mean, you now work in sort of big, PR, long-term sort of strategic advice for companies and individuals, having been a political editor of a national newspaper for many, many years. What would your advice be to Prince Andrew right now as he's being urged to stay out of sight over this Chinese spy scandal, this guy H6? We're only allowed to call him H6 because of a British court order. But what would your advice to Prince Andrew be?
It's a very, very difficult situation that Prince Andrew finds himself in, obviously, and we all can see that, and we all know that, and a period of quiet and keeping out of the cameras is obviously the way to go for him.
Not an Emily Maitlis interview? I
think that we all know that Emily Maitlis's interview was obviously a tempting moment for the Prince, and he decided wrongly, in my view, to take that offer. I mean, here's a situation that he can't win in, and he needs to probably just keep out of the limelight for a very long time. And I think, for the royal family, who are always in the spotlight, particularly at Christmas, it's very important that the focus is on family and all the messages that they want to send to the country. We know that the King and Princess have both been going through really difficult health scares this year, and we wish them all the best. But the Prince Andrew issue is not going to go away easily. It's a very important issue, the H6 issue, which I prefer us to focus on. That's the bigger issue, not whether Prince Andrew was somebody who was duped. I mean, Prince Andrew would have taken the advice of the Foreign Office, I'm sure of that. And the Foreign Office has subsequently said, this guy is somebody we need to be worried about, and the government has taken the right steps. It's a much deeper and bigger issue.
Indeed. We were talking to former Security Minister Tom Tugendhat. He says, this is tip of the iceberg. The only reason we know about this really is because it involved Prince Andrew, but obviously still trying to sort of find out more details about who this man was. But clearly, fingers in many different pies at the heart of the British establishment. Let's talk about the British establishment, though, because we know the British establishment was massively opposed to Brexit. We know Sir Keir Starmer, when he was Shadow Brexit Secretary, was massively opposed to Brexit, tried to stop it from happening for 3 years in that role before Boris Johnson got elected in 2019. We understand that Keir Starmer has now set up a unit of more than 100 civil servants, more, our former Brexit chief negotiator Lord Frost points out, than he had to negotiate Brexit. He calls it a surrender squad, but their aim is apparently to basically rejig our relationship with Brussels, to have closer EU ties going forward. Do you think Keir Starmer is going to try and basically take us back into the EU by hook or by crook through the back door?
It's clear that this government believes that Britain needs a closer relationship with the European Union. There are others who take the view that what Britain needs to do is to properly do Brexit. And that means not to try and find softer relationships. It means to have a relationship with the regulatory regime, with the legislative regime, which allows Britain to stand on its own 2 feet and compete on the world stage without necessarily having to do deals behind the scenes. And those are the two very specific positions. What we have right now is we're kind of stuck in the middle. We haven't got one or the other. And I do think that Keir Starmer's hope and aim, with lots and lots of his cabinet colleagues, is to create a new relationship with the European Union, not in and not out, but a much more closer working relationship. And of course, the danger of that, Julia, is that those people in the European Union only want to see Britain punished for leaving in the first place, and they will try and find a way of finding us in some way, or forcing us to do rules which suit them, not us. And that's the danger here. It's very, very difficult to renegotiate a way back into a club that you've left. particularly one which is so political.
Well, indeed. I mean, I still don't think that Britain would vote to go back in any way. The terms in which the EU would offer us back in, we'd lose that to Margaret Thatcher's rebate, and think we'd be paying a lot more money. I think if there was any debate and we looked at the world economies, we'd be saying, well, why on earth do we want to harness ourselves to these failing economies in Europe rather than looking, to the Trans-Pacific, those countries, obviously to America and elsewhere. I think it's going to become even more obvious as the years go by, particularly under a Trump presidency, and what he's going to plan to do. Boris Johnson has written in the Mail today, he's accusing Keir Starmer of telling, he says, barefaced lies after assembling this so-called surrender squad, and basically that, he always planned to take us back in to the EU, even though, of course, after 2019, when he became Labour leader, he said he accepted that we had left and we wouldn't try to take us back in. Do you think that's a fair analysis from the former Prime Minister? Barefaced lies from Starmer?
That the opponents to Keir Starmer are trying to get up a narrative about the Prime Minister, which is somebody who you can't trust, you can't take his word. So whether you look at this particular issue of the European Union, whether you look at the tax situation, the Prime Minister made promises before the election and they changed in the budget. So the narrative that Boris is trying to get going is you can't believe a word Keir Starmer says. So whether or not there's massive truth to this or a little bit of truth, it's really about political game playing, trying to position your opponent in a particular way. Why? Because most of our viewers and listeners are too busy. Yeah. Most of us are getting on with our lives. We can't really focus on every single day and every single move that happens in politics. Where we act is when we get big ideas about a person, whether they're good, bad, and that's what Boris is trying to do right now. So whether or not it sticks, time will tell. But of course, that's the challenge for Keir Starmer, is he has to bear in mind that 51% of this nation voted to leave the European Union. So he needs to bear that in mind. He needs to bear in mind that Nigel Farage is very much back on the political scene, could well be given a lot of money by Elon Musk to really fight the next election. All of this has an implication for the Conservative Party as well. So lots happening here.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, Prime Minister out of the country again today. He's in Norway. I mean, he's gone from being, was it two-tier Keir, free-gear Keir, now never hear Keir. I mean, because people aren't seeing him. But there's no doubt at all all of this having an impact on his poll ratings. I mean, he's basically, according to a damning new poll, the worst Prime Minister in modern history, according to the people. Basically, a whopping 6 in 10 people say they're dissatisfied with the PM's track record, including more than a third of, 4 out of 10 Labour supporters. Just 1 in 4 voters across all political voters said they were satisfied with his performance since Labour won power in July. And barely half, just 54% of Labour's own voters said they were satisfied. Now, a lot of this will be, winter fuel allowance being scrapped, the farmers' tax, the free gear stuff. It was all very tacky. A lot of people very unhappy. He's not pleasing his own voters, at the same time certainly not pleasing those who didn't vote for him. I think Liz Truss would probably have come up worse if she had lasted 5 months, which she only lasted 49 days, of course. But what can Keir Starmer do to improve his ratings, other than, I don't know, do a better job?
Time is the great challenge here. The Prime Minister knew absolutely that he was going to come in and he was going to shake things up, and shaking things up is always going to annoy people. And don't forget, one of the reasons the polls are saying what they're saying is because all day long, every day, the headlines are saying the same sorts of things. So unsurprisingly, people get that impression. If I was advising him, I wouldn't be particularly worried about that right now. What matters is delivery and showing competence over the long course. And that's what he really needs to focus on. I mean, a word on going abroad. I'm massively relaxed about him going abroad. I know that that's a sort of constant theme, but the fact is he's a new Prime Minister. He doesn't know relationships on the world stage, and he needs Britain needs a Prime Minister who is well connected on the world stage, whether we like it or not. And the only way of doing that is getting into into the room with people and forging personal relationships, which behind the scenes things happen that our listeners and viewers don't see, don't know about, don't really wouldn't care about until it mattered. And that's the job of the Prime Minister, is to build relationships so he has alliances, and that Britain is taken seriously where it matters. And that's what he's doing right now. It doesn't matter really that he's not here in London. What matters is he's representing the country.
Yeah. I understand that, but I think that also a lot of people go, well, but we've got a lot of things we need to have dealt with here. It's that perception, isn't it? You know as well as I do, politics is a lot about what people perceive rather than what is actually happening.
Perception is 9/10 of the law. There's no question about it. And in this day of multimedia, you can actually create the perception of being in lots of places at the same time with different footage and all the rest of it. And they try and do that. They do a decent job of that. But I will say this. We will be the first people to criticise him for not being on the world stage and creating relationships with countries that really matter. And as I say, he can't lead by day-to-day headlines. He needs to do the right thing as the Prime Minister, take some pain where there's pain necessary, because change is happening. When you do change, people don't like it. And I totally understand that, and that's difficult. That's why he needs to be constantly surrounded by good people, good advisors, a cabinet that's doing a good job and focused on their job.
Good luck with that. George Pascoe Watson, former political editor of The Sun, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Sam Armstrong's still with me in the studio. Thing is, I don't think Starmer is surrounded by a lot of good advisors or good cabinet ministers. He's not perceived to be doing a good job, I think, back in the UK. And it's all very well, isn't it, not chasing headlines, not worrying about what the 24-hour news schedule is about, but actually that does impact. And there is just this general feeling that Labour have completely lost control just within months of taking office. And we've got another 4.5 years of this.
Yeah, I think the era of the kind of thick-of-it style, shouty, sweary advisors, very strong figures, within, of course, based on real people within the Labour Party, is now long behind us. Yeah. I mean, Keir Starmer, we saw who he brought in as his chief of staff. Sue Gray, who ended up giving more interviews than he did, causing a huge rupture, debacle, terrible start to an administration. And it is clear that this is a man that has got relatively poor judgment about the character of people. Yeah. He has brought a convicted fraudster into his cabinet. He has brought a civil servant into his team that shouldn't have been taking that kind of job. And we've seen time and time again a man that just surrounds himself with actually quite weak people. And the part of it is, in my mind, you do wonder if, Keir Starmer's a bit more comfortable when he keeps some of his potential threats within the Labour Party.
I think I always find fascinating when he is questioned by journalists who do get to ask him questions, how irritated and tetchy he gets. He clearly doesn't like to be questioned. You think, well, sorry, Prime Minister, you're a democratic elected politician. People are going to ask you questions you don't like. Get over it. If you don't like it, maybe, I don't know, move to China. Xi Jinping doesn't have to answer difficult questions. I'd love to hear from you what you make of Keir Starmer. He's on the telly right now, meeting with the Prime Minister of Norway. Never hear Keir. Love to hear your thoughts on that. 0344 499 1000. But in particular, Keir Starmer setting up a surrender squad, we're told, of 100 civil servants to basically undo Brexit, create closer ties with the EU. What's your reaction to that? Do you trust Keir Starmer on Brexit? Do you think that's going to be undermined? I'd love to hear your thoughts on the Chinese spy story as well. What advice would you give Prince Andrew right now? Do give us a call, 0344 499 1000. This is Talk.
Kamala Harris, this is her story, right? Is it her trajectory? Yeah! 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 Wah, 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 wah.
What about you say, oh, the election was bought? Kamala Harris had more money than any campaign in the history of US politics and still managed to lose.
Wait there. When I say that, though, Samara, there's a very famous saying in Russia, it's not who casts the vote, it's who counts the vote. And I would say it's not who raises the money, it's how you spend the money.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
This is Talk, the home of common sense, with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. Well, the Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, right now is in Norway. He's meeting with the Norwegian Prime Minister, and judging by the press conference they're giving, I can see in the corner of my eye, it looks like the long winter nights, and they are very long in winter nights in Norway, must just fly by with these two gentlemen. I mean, we're not taking it live because, as usual rules, same for PMQs and big speeches. I like you too much. But Sam Armstrong, I mean, fly on the wall. This meeting, this one is all about clean energy, isn't it? This is the latest one. I mean, strategic partnership with Norway. Norway, by the way, loads of oil, loads of gas. When they got the money from all that, they put it into a sovereign wealth fund. You're only allowed to spend max of 4% of it a year. They're going to be a massively wealthy country forever. If only we did long-term planning in this country, eh?
Yeah, indeed. But it just tells you everything you need to know about Keir, that he's yet again flown out of the country. I think you only got to assume that he just wants to be somewhere he's popular.
Yeah.
And so he has to flee wherever possible.
They're all like this. They're all like this.
He flies there on his own private jet.
I've got no issue with that.
No problem with that.
Prime Minister, our British Prime Minister should be in a private jet.
He flies there to an oil-rich country.
Yeah.
In order to meet with someone, in order to lecture us about why we should all impoverish ourselves, in order to satisfy some crazed environmental theorem.
It is just bewildering, isn't it? I just want to ask you also just about Yvette Cooper. She's refused yesterday as the Home Secretary to set a timetable for cutting dangerous small boat crossings. We've seen they're up 20-odd% on last year, although down on 20-odd% on the year before. 23 was a particularly... 22 was a particularly bad year, wasn't it? But boat crossings in the hundreds over the weekend in December tells us that the gangs ain't smashed just yet. Do you think they're going to get away without having an actual timetable? I mean, Rishi Sunak said optimistically, stop the boats, and we were allowed to judge him in a year. That bunch of what was the latest milestones from Keir Starmer a year ago, feels like a year ago, a week ago. He didn't even mention migration.
Yeah, they're clearly hoping they can sweep the problem under the carpet.
They're crazy if they think that.
Yeah, and here's the thing. You could only believe that you could sweep it under the carpet if you live the kind of gilded lives that they do.
Totally.
When this is in your community, when it's your local hotel that's no longer taking bookings for weddings, but it's all of a sudden full of a bunch of men that gather around, loiter around, recently arrived, goodness knows who they are.
Harassing teenage girls, which is often the case.
You can never, ever, ever forget this. And the British public won't forget this. And I just think it points to, actually, the sad decline of the Labour Party, that they think they can get away with this. This is no longer a Labour Party rooted in working-class communities.
Oh, absolutely not.
This is no longer a Labour Party that understands what ordinary people are thinking. This is somebody trying to get away with it in order that he can continue to jet around the world at our expense to lecture us about things that we're still doing wrong.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, I've been wittering on about this for two and a half decades now, and it's interesting. They kind of woken up, they're having to pretend to want to deal with it, but they don't have their hearts in it. Yvette Cooper doesn't actually believe in borders. I've interviewed her enough times. She doesn't really believe in borders, doesn't believe there should be any limit on the number of people coming here. Kind of why they like Brexit. Don't like Brexit, I should say. Keir Starmer set up a surrender squad of more than 100 civil servants, we're told, ready to undo Brexit and create close ties with the EU. What's your reaction to that? 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. Let's go to David, who is in South Wales. Hello, David.
Yeah, well, your surrender squad is actually an act of treason, isn't it?
Quite right.
Let's be honest about it. As far as Norway's concerned, in the world of movers and shakers, they don't exist. Yeah. But he has to go there, spend our money to go there. And he comes back with, when he was in the country, he only came up with Islamic ideas, nothing original.
Islamic? Who?
Yeah.
Starmer?
Yes.
What are you talking about?
I am talking about the man who pronounced that he would protect the Muslims in this country. And
well, I would like Muslims protected. I want everyone protection in this country. Jews, Muslims, atheists, Catholics, Sikhs.
Yeah, I want everybody protected in this country. But when the Prime Minister comes out wearing a brand new suit and claims to protect a certain sect, then you've got
issues there. But can we take it back? Let's just not get way longer. You're saying this is an act of treason effective in Brexit. Do you think that Keir Starmer was actually going to try and aim to basically, in all but name, take us back into the EU by the end of his 5 years in Parliament?
Well, if he's going, yes, you will. You will try. But the thing is, he has cut the winter fuel allowance. Yep. To pay for an act of treason.
Oh, OK. Thank you. I'm going to have to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed, David. Take a quick call from Andrew. He's in Hertfordshire. Hello, Andrew.
Hello. I'll be the first person to wish you a happy Christmas and a great new year next year and for you, your family.
Oh, you're very kind. Right back at you there, Andrew. I just want to be well again. I'll just take being well again. That would be nice. Andrew, what do you make of this supposed Brexit surrender squad?
He is a North London lawyer.
Ta-da.
Look what a North London lawyer did to us before. They lie for their own good. Look at what he did last week. Yeah. He, a human rights lawyer, sat next to a man who cut a journalist like you up when he was alive with a bone saw.
Well, he ordered his henchmen to do it. He just listened to it over the phone, apparently. This is, of course, the murder of Adnan Khashoggi in the Saudi embassy and of course, ordered by the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia. Yeah, exactly. Quite happy to glad hand with any of these people, isn't he? Do you think he'd sell us down the river? Do you think people would notice if he did this?
What they're trying to do, Julia, if you take a helicopter view of it, they're not going to get any growth because they're destroying the economy. We can see that. So if he could get some sort of deal with the EU for more trade, they might get a little bit of a blimp or a bump in relation to a financial kickstart for us.
Well, I mean, my thing is I don't even know why we need to have a trade. Can't we just have free trade and we just trade normally with them? It's bizarre, isn't it? Instead of giving away our own power. Andrew, thank you very much indeed. Appreciate your call. Coming up, we're going to be talking more about all of these big stories. Also going to be talking about the convicted terrorist suing a pub, apparently because he finds their sign in the name of the pub deeply offensive. More on that up next. This is Talk.
across the UK. On DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile. The home of common sense. This is Talk.
And a very good morning to you. This is Talk, the Home of Common Sense with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. And whether you are listening on DAB+ radio or on your smart speaker, watching on YouTube or on your connected device, it's fantastic to have you joining me. Also fantastic to have commentator Sam Armstrong joining me. You probably gathered already on Monday morning. We haven't got quite the ball of energy we normally have. We're pumping around the studio because we're both poorly. And the worst thing is, I'm the one who gave this to Sam by coughing all over him in the studio a week ago. So a very big apology for that to you and indeed to Sam as well. Very good morning to you, Sam.
Good morning.
He said he's really cross with me, you can probably tell. Anyway, coming up in this hour, going to talk more about Prince Andrew being urged to voluntarily withdraw from public view over Christmas, not turning up with the rest of the royals at Sandringham on Christmas Day and the like. This after it's revealed the Duke of York had close business ties for 10 years, described a close confidant by his staff with a man now known to be a Chinese spy. MPs are threatening to publicly name the spy, known only as H6, thanks to a British court order. We're going to be talking to a Reform UK MP as they threaten to name him using parliamentary privilege in the Commons later today. Also, Keir Starmer has set up a surrender squad of more than 100 civil servants ready to junk Brexit for closer EU ties. This comes as the PM has been talking about a reset in relations with Brussels since entering number 10. But do you trust Keir Starmer to uphold Brexit, given that he spent 3 years as Shadow Brexit Secretary trying to undermine it? Also, Home Secretary Yvette Cooper has refused to set a timetable for reducing small boat arrivals over the Channel, despite admitting that, current levels are far too high. Amazing she even admits that, because she doesn't really believe in border controls, that woman, I promise you that. But do give us a call on all of those topics, particularly about whether you trust Keir Starmer over the so-called surrender squad. It's been dubbed that by Lord Frost, the man who, of course, was actually our chief negotiator under Boris Johnson to leave the EU. He says he didn't have anything like 100 civil servants when he was negotiating Brexit, so why on earth would Keir Starmer need more than 100 civil servants paid for by you and me to effectively try and undo Brexit? He doesn't have a mandate for that, does he? Give us a call, 0344 499 1000. You can text the word TALK to 87222. You can also message us on X at Talk TV, and calls are charged at the national rate. Text costs £1, standard network rate message. Let's... Before we go back to the Chinese spy story, which I know is a massive, big story, EU, massive big story you just heard in the news just then, that latest headline. The woman, they call her a model. I mean, model. You just take your kit off on OnlyFans because you're just cheap. Victoria Thomas Bowen, she's the woman who threw that McDonald's banana milkshake over Nigel Farage when he was out campaigning in Clacton in the general election. Extraordinarily, she has avoided jail despite throwing the entire contents of the milkshake and indeed the cup at Nigel Farage. He at the time didn't know what it was. Numerous threats we've had against politicians. We've had Farage being milkshake before. The left seem to think this is all hilarious. Not only has she, in her police interview, said she doesn't regret doing it, she has refused to apologise to Nigel Farage. Extraordinarily, she initially denied assault by beating, which is what it was when you throw something over somebody in the street when they're just going about their lawful business. She later changed her plea to guilty, so she pleaded guilty to criminal damage, also to the drink spattering on a security officer's jacket. Extraordinarily, though, Victoria Thomas Bowen has avoided jail. She's been given instead a 13-week sentence, so a 3-month sentence, suspended for a year. She's going to have to carry out 120 hours of unpaid work. That's what she was ordered by Westminster Magistrate Court. But she's not going to go to prison. She hasn't admitted that what she did was wrong. She hasn't apologised. She showed any impact at all. Doesn't care at all, and yet she hasn't been sent to prison. If only Sam Armstrong, she'd written a tweet, a strongly worded tweet to Nigel Farage, she may well have gone to jail. How is it that someone who doesn't even admit they've done anything wrong not get sentenced for what is an assault, throwing something in someone's face is an assault, how does she get a suspended sentence when people who also have no criminal record, who were not on the site of a riot post Southport, when people have literally gone to prison for months and months on end, some even jailed for longer than that, for simply writing a tweet?
Julia, it is so much worse than that. What this woman did was not just an attack on Nigel Farage, though, let me be clear, for him it is deeply unpleasant, so obviously, that wherever he goes. But what this woman did was an attack on our democracy.
Totally.
Nigel Farage is a campaigner that goes out there. He meets people.
Unlike a lot of them.
Goes out on the streets and he meets voters. And everywhere I've gone in politics, everywhere I've gone in my political career, people have said, we never see them anymore. We're fed up. We never get to meet politicians. They're not men of the people anymore. Well, we wonder why, because when, like Nigel Farage, you go out there campaigning in a constituency, what happens? Some disgraceful, disgusting piece of rubbish like this woman comes straight up to him and throws a milkshake all over his face, ruins entirely that day's campaigning. And look, as he says, he has no idea what's in that cup. It could be acid, it could be any number of noxious substance. And look, the result is this. Nigel Farage has now had to be really clear. He cannot have MP surgeries in his constituency because of his profile.
Yeah.
That is a fundamental British tradition, that you can go and see your MP and raise your concern. And then you get people like this, pieces of trash, that come up to politicians and ruin it for everyone. So don't just tell me that this is a common assault. This is not a common assault. This is a fundamental attack on our democracy. And look, lots on the left in this country got rightly angry about what Donald Trump did in encouraging January the 6th and the actions we saw there. This is every bit as serious an attack on our own democracy.
But the left always find, the Owen Joneses and all that lot, they all find it hilariously funny when someone milkshakes. It's almost like a verb now. To milkshake. Nigel Farage. It's all very funny. Oh, if someone says a hurty word on Twitter or in the street even to a Labour MP, it's clutching pearls time. They feel completely different about it. I just find it extraordinary why the rules are different. I don't have to agree with a word that anyone says to defend their right to be safe in the street, and particularly, as you say, politicians. And you're right, this isn't just about one man some random bird who sells her body and her soul on OnlyFans for money, which, I don't know, when you sell your body, what's the word? What is the word for that? Oh, if you can help me, I don't know, but women who sell their bodies, I don't know, just for, I can't think what the word is, but I'm sure you can imagine what it might be. The idea that, because they do something like that, they're a hero on the left. It is so much more important than some, cheap woman deciding she wants to have more people look at her OnlyFans page. Make money out of it, love. I mean, I don't care. If that's where you want to sell your soul and sell your body, then fair enough. But, as you say, doing it off the back of our democracy, because every single person should feel strongly that our politicians should be allowed to campaign safely without intimidation. We had absolute outcry of the intimidation of many Labour campaigners, particularly by some very ideological, political Islamist groups. Very, very intimidating. And quite rightly, we called it out on this station, because I don't care who it is, whether I'd vote for the MP or not, I want them to be able to campaign safely and not be intimidated. But the rules always seem to be different for Nigel Farage. It's like it's a free-for-all. And we have seen MPs killed. Extraordinary how much more attention is paid to the awful murder of Joe Cox than the equally awful murder of David Amos, because somehow it doesn't count as much if it's not a female Labour MP and it's not someone on the right who does it. It's an Islamist, so we have to brush it under the carpet. But this is a reality. MPs are being threatened. They're getting, literally death threats. There are numerous people going to jail over these death threats and things. He does not know at that point, Nigel Farage, whether that is acid, petrol, any other noxious substance. Thank God it was just a banana milkshake. But what if it isn't next time? Are all these people going to find it all funny next time?
Yeah, and by the way, somebody else was done a few weeks ago, also avoided jail. Now, look, it's as disgusting when it happens to a Labour MP... That was the brick, wasn't it? Yeah. As when it happens to anyone else. But, look, Nigel Farage is treated differently. He was denied police protection for many years, despite the fact it was blatantly obvious to anybody that looked that the threat to him was perhaps greater than any politician other than the Prime Minister or maybe the most
there seemed to be a view which was, well, you know, if you say the horrible things you say, Nigel, then you have to just accept it. I mean, A, I don't think he does say horrible things, and B, no one should have to accept it. Even my view, even a politician saying things I virulently disagree with, I still want to be safe. It's just, I mean, two-tier justice once again. I'd love to hear your reaction to this. I think this is absolutely shocking. This cheap selling her body on OnlyFans model. She's not a model. She's still can't remember what that word is. I'm sure it begins with P, but I can't remember what it is. Victoria Thomas at Bowen, 25-year-old, throwing a banana milkshake over Nigel Farage, not facing a day behind bars. Now, you could argue you shouldn't have to spend a day behind bars for that, first offence or whatever, but why are other people facing months behind bars for writing things? I'm sorry, at what point is throwing something in someone's face less serious than someone writing something on the internet? It is just mind-blowing. Give us a call, 0344 499 1000. That is the number to call to have yours say. Let's get back to this Chinese spy story. We're going to talk to Reform UK MP James McMurdoch a little bit later in this hour. Reform UK has said they are going to name this spy, known only as H6, an extraordinary situation. We've got a Chinese spy who managed to reach his tentacles to the whole way through the British establishment, a close confidant, we're told by one of Prince Andrew's aides in documentation that was released in this court. He's now been banned from entering the country. He's now he's a Chinese spy. We're not allowed to know his name. Because there was an appeal at this immigration court, and yet the rest of the world knows his name. His name is public in Chinese media. Extraordinarily, apologies. And yeah, we're not allowed to know his name, but Prince Andrew has been caught in this web with yet another unsavoury friendship. What a surprise. But this story, as Tom Tugendhat, the former security minister, sanctioned by the Chinese, is so much bigger than Prince Andrew, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely, because it reveals what many people have been saying for a great long period of time, that China and hostile states like it are actively attempting to destroy and attack our society. They're attempting to invade the very highest parts of the British establishment in order that they can capture and control our government, our systems, our society, and enforce their way by hook or by crook. And look, we need to wake up to this. On the one hand, it is a silly story about Prince Andrew. Yeah. I mean, this guy was actively attempting to destroy this country, and he's still not Prince Andrew's most shameful friendship. Yeah.
I mean, that's saying something. Apologies for the coughing through your words there. But this is the thing. He has so many unsavoury ones. But useful idiots like Prince Andrew, people like the Jeffrey Epsteins, the questionable potentates and people in the various Stan countries, and the likes of Chinese spies, they gain access into this world, this elite world, getting to go to Buckingham Palace, meeting the various prime ministers. Photographs of this guy with David Cameron when he was prime minister, Theresa May when she was prime minister. It may have just been a meet and a greet, shake hands. Prime ministers do a lot of this. Doesn't mean he had close, confidential conversations with them. But there's just to tell you, this man was able to gain access to the upper echelons of British, power and policy making.
Yeah, absolutely. And why did he want to do it? Well, because China has got its sights set on the UK. It craves our technology and does everything possible to steal it. It wants to interfere with our democracy and do everything to impose its worldview here. It wants to oppress refugees, Hong Kong refugees in the UK.
And we've seen that against their embassy.
Over here. And all through this is running a theme which China is attempting to set itself up as the new global superpower. Yeah. It doesn't want to rival the US, it wants to overtake the US, and it wants to put its totalitarian form of authoritarian government as the new global standard for everyone to live up to.
I mean, this Belt and Roads policy they've had around Africa and South America, the Caribbean, I mean, if you want to know why we've got all these countries demanding reparations from the West, who sort of moving away from us, it's because of Chinese money. That is literally what they're doing. That's the influence they've got. It is extraordinary how many people involved in our Foreign Office, in government generally, civil service, politicians, media, academia, science, business, are completely asleep at the wheel when it comes to the threat of China. This is a hostile, totalitarian police state. I mean, this is not a country that we should be doing as much business as we are doing right now. And yet we had Keir Starmer at one of the recent summits in Brazil, you know, having a one-on-one meeting. He doesn't want to, you know, he doesn't want to do anything to embarrass the Chinese. And God forbid we must not embarrass the Chinese. Keir Starmer today on his trip to Norway, he said the government was, quote, concerned about the challenge that China poses. I mean, concerned. Oh, really? Because I'm terrified.
Yeah, I'm a hell of a lot more than concerned, and I'll tell you why. Because unlike Keir Starmer, unlike the Foreign Office, I actually take seriously what the Chinese government, what Chinese leaders say. And when they say, for example, that they are determined to invade Taiwan,
they don't make a secret of it,
right? They repeatedly say it in every public speech, every public declaration that they will do that. I take that seriously. Why do I take that seriously? Because if you think the Ukraine war, which has put up all those gas prices, has made us poorer in this country, you ain't seen nothing yet. Taiwan is the global hub of manufacturing for the chips that go into everything we use today. The entire global economy,
like 95% of them, I think, made there.
Decimated if that's happened.
Which, by the way, is an insane situation for the world economy to have got itself into. But we can't. What we know that the move now is, oh well, you know, we better start developing our own chip technology. So when Taiwan's invaded, we've barely stood up to Russia enough over Ukraine. There's going to be a big concession, and Russia's going to basically walk away with some Ukraine territory in the new year when Donald Trump gets into power. Well, that's the strong expectation. Even Zelensky's hinting at that now. But when it comes to Taiwan, when it comes to the threat from the Chinese, we're barely able to, you know, lots of countries, even Germany didn't want to, like, stand up to Russia. We ain't going to stand up to China.
Yeah, and
we're so dependent on
Why didn't Germany stand up to Russia? Well, because it had been compromised. And how compromised are we, right? It's not only the fact that we are grossly dependent on Chinese imports, it's the fact that now we're discovering, yes, all of our elites have been cozying up.
Yeah.
So all these nice Chinese fellows that come over here and all of a sudden have got these businesses where they can give you a load of money and
academia is basically being completely bought up. It is completely bought up by the Chinese.
Every piece of sensitive British technology developed at a UK lab or university in the last 10 to 15 years, pretty much every piece of technology is now in the hands of the Chinese, taken, stolen. Massive amounts of public investment to develop that tech. It was going to fuel our economy for the next 30, 40 years, and it's just all been
even like the push, remember this whole thing, we 500,000 green jobs we're going to get from going into, you know, to green cars. Yeah, that's not going to happen. And the eco cars, the EVs, all the EVs that people buy, they're all coming from China, where they're all built in factories powered by, guess what? Coal, guys. I mean, China are laughing at us, but that's the thing. You don't have to sort of basically take over not just a country or a continent, the Western, you know, alliance, using tanks and fighter jets. You can do it with the economy. You can do it culturally. You can do, and that's what they're doing. They play a long game. Our politicians can barely cope with a 24-hour news cycle. These guys operate on a 24-year cycle. Xi Jinping is president for life. He is planning to go absolutely nowhere. The people not taking this seriously are, frankly, living in cloud cuckoo land. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. I also want to hear your thoughts on Keir Starmer setting up this surrender squad of more than 100 civil servants at the heart of government. Basically, their job is to, undo Brexit, to bring us closer to Europe. Why on earth do we want to be closer to the EU when their economies are completely collapsing? Wouldn't we be better off being closer to a lot of the economies in the East and America, whose economies are booming? God, might make more sense economically to be closer to China, if not politically. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Give us a call on that. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. Up next, we are going to be talking about the convicted terrorist who is suing a pub for a deeply offensive pub sign and name. I kid you not. We'll get to that up next. This is Talk, the home of common sense.
You are a white, straight, middle-aged man. You are now, in my contention, the most oppressed demographic in Britain. You've got no chance of getting a job. You've got no chance of becoming selected for a parliamentary position because everybody else takes precedence. If a particular government department or a private sector establishment said, well, actually, we've got too many blacks and Asians in our business right department, so for the next 4 or 5 weeks, we're only recruiting white people. Can you imagine? I mean, A, it would be a criminal offence. Well, why isn't it the other way around? But it's just beyond the pale.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
This is Talk, the home of common sense, with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. Thank you very much indeed for your company. 11:25 is the time. Sam Armstrong is still with me. Sam, we've got to talk about this extraordinary story involving a convicted terrorist. This is what's so mind-blowing, who is suing a pub, taking them to court, claiming to be deeply offended by the sign outside the venue. This is Khalid Bakr. He's previously spent 4 years behind bars for preparing jihadi propaganda, as you do. Easy mistake for anyone to make. I'm just amazed he actually went to jail. No one did that anymore. Oh, including if you throw a milkshake over a party leader. But he is suing for more than £1,000, £1,850 indeed, from the Saracen's Head Inn in Chesham in Buckinghamshire. He says that the sign of the pub is a racist depiction of a bearded Arab or Turk and insists the depiction incites violence. He's also announced plans to take on over 30 other pubs with the same name and similar signs. I hope we can put up for you watching on YouTube a picture of the pub sign. It's exactly what you would expect it to be. But this is a a pub. It's been in existence for 500 years, this pub. The landlord, Robbie Hayes, says it's been called the Saracen's Head for 500 years. He's just chancing his hand. Of course, it worries me. You never know with people like this, because obviously he's worried he might actually lose this case. But, I mean, this is mad that someone says they're upset and offended by a pub sign that's been there for hundreds of years. There's nothing racist or inciting of violence. But this is the thing. These are the sort of cases that just make the mockery of our freedom of speech and indeed of our courts, don't they?
Yeah, it's hard to know where to start. But let's start with this. There is no such right as the right not to be offended. I find plenty of things offensive. I find older men that wear socks with sandals to be offensive. I find innumerable things offensive. But you know what? That's life. People have the right to do what they want. It's a free country. We used to say that, actually, but don't even say that anymore because nobody actually assumes it is. But look, this is just everything that's wrong with this country, which is the first thing that anyone does, deeply dangerous individual, somebody that, frankly, I hate to say it, but I've got no idea what he's even doing in this country if he's already prepared terroristic propaganda. He goes around resorting to lawyers, and why wouldn't he? Because no doubt he will have already got a series of North London, some of Keir Starmer's mates, no doubt, on speed dial, ready to do this. Look, this country had a great history, and the Crusades weren't all good. They weren't all bad.
I mean, they were pretty brutal. But everything in those centuries was brutal. I mean, I didn't realise Saracen was a term used until the 5th century to refer to Arabs and then also Muslims years later. It's among the most popular names for a pub in the UK, alongside things like the Red Lion,
Are they going to have to rename the rugby team? Is the Saracens rugby team going to have to be renamed now? This is another American import as well, where
we're all going to be offended by things.
Getting their names changed.
I'm thinking if you're someone who's pushed jihadi propaganda, I think it probably takes quite a lot to offend you.
I think this guy's the new Anjem Chowdhury. I think he's a joker come jihadist that is intent on abusing, exploiting our generosity, our political systems, our legal structures. I think we should have nothing to do with him, and I think the sooner that the security services no doubt find that he's still at it, that's a speculation.
Legally, we cannot make that. You know perfectly well. Come on, we cannot possibly make that assumption. This man is convicted and has served sentence for a crime. And but here's the thing. I mean, all I would like to say is that Robbie Hayes, the landlord, do not pay up. No. Any of you pub owners, we will crowdsource for you. We will help to crowdsource for you, and I'm sure you do a lot of work with the Free Speech Union. Free Speech Union are happy to help on these sort of cases. Thank you very much indeed for that. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that as well. Give us a call. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. Let's go to some of your phone calls right now about Keir Starmer and this surrender squad. I love this name, surrender squad, from it's what Lord Frost, the former Brexit chief negotiator, good friend of the show, has called this bunch of 100+ civil servants. What the hell? All on the taxpayers' dime. Basically, their job is to try and have closer links with the EU. I mean, why don't we just go and just sort of lick, I don't know, Macron's backside and have done with it and just, beg our way back in, which is what Keir Starmer wants to do, isn't it? Well, let's talk about this then. Let's talk to Greg, who's on the line in Edinburgh. Hello, Greg.
Good morning, Julia.
Good morning. Very well. What do you want to say?
Well, it's the time of year for political predictions, isn't it? What's going to come next year?
I try to avoid those.
I'm going to be even bolder. I'm going to be the mystic Meg of 4.5 years time forward.
Yeah.
And my prediction is, but before the end of this Parliament, we will be fully fledged members of the European Union. Because Starmer, this is his last chance to get what he's so obviously desired for so long, is he won't give a vote. There will be no referendum, because they've learned their lesson.
Yeah.
To trust the British people, and when they do, they just ignore us anyway. But the entire establishment is for it. So it will go through Parliament. It will be an act of Parliament that we will rejoin the European Union before the end of this Labour term.
See, I disagree with you. I think there'll be an act of Parliament, and I don't think it'll be anything so obvious as rejoining the European Union. It'll be one of those things like they did after the French referendum, the Irish referendum on the Treaty of Lisbon, where they just changed the wording. So it will in all but name rejoin, but it won't actually officially state it. Because they know they wouldn't get away with that. But we need to stop it from happening, because we're not going to reap any of the benefits when we're sort of half in, half out.
Yeah, that's true, but this is what they've pinned all their hopes on for the last, since 2016.
Yeah.
So, okay, we won't, the star won't be on the flag, we won't be there, but in all but name, we will be part of the EU in all its aspects.
I fear you are right, Greg. I really do. I don't trust this man. I've always said I think he's ruled himself out on grounds of not being a Democrat. I think politicians, when they do things like that, I think they should be punished by voters forever and ever. Greg, thank you for that. Let's get to Jason. He's on the line. He's called up on 0344 499 1000 as well. And Jason is in Sheffield. Good morning to you, Jason. Hello.
Hello there, Julia.
Hello. What do you reckon? What do you reckon on this surrender squad? Sorry, same difference.
Yeah, it's a demolition squad. I agree with Graham to a certain degree. What I think is going to happen is, this is my view, in around 3.5 years' time, 18 months, a year before the next general election has to be called, Starmer will look at the Labour Party's polling and his approval rating, and if it's still basically dropped as deep as the Mariana Trench, I think he'll then call another referendum to make sure that we go.
But you think we go back in? Do you think if we had a referendum, you think? Because I think the economy is going to be in tatters, because this green agenda is going to ruin our economy even more than it's already ruined. But do you think that people would go, oh well, if we were back in the EU, everything would be fine, even though the French, the German economies are in the basket as well?
I do, because I think they'll use that propaganda saying, look how bad the country is since we left the EU. We were much better before we left the EU.
Nothing to do with lockdown or Ukraine war, do you think, but wait a minute, the British public didn't fall for it last time. They're not going to fall for it next time.
I don't know. I'm not. I wasn't that confident, but we'd vote to leave last time.
No.
And I would be slightly less confident
That's interesting. Well, the thing is, if we did vote to go back in, the terms of which we were going back in, we wouldn't have the Margaret Thatcher's rebate that she negotiated. The terms would be horrific, and they would be asking us basically to pay for everything and bailing them all out. I don't think the British people are that stupid. I have so much more faith in the British people than politicians do. That's for sure. Jason, thank you so much for your call. Appreciate that. Sam Armstrong, question: yes or no? If there were another referendum to vote to go in, return to the EU or not, whatever those terms would be, and the EU would be setting those terms. Let's be honest. Do you think the British people would vote to go in again?
No.
No, I don't either. There you are, you see. There we are. Do you want? I've said yes or no, but
you gave me an ultimatum.
I know, but come on.
Well, look, I think the terms will be appalling, and I think the British public would know that all of the interruption, all of that disruption we went through getting out of the thing, we would have to go through more so to get back in. And I think they know what it is. It is politicians voting for doing politician stuff,
taking power away from us.
All the while, they're still not sorting out the things that we actually want them to do: migration, the NHS, grow the economy, do the basics, then worry about your global jet-setting. International
post-political career, which is what they're all worried about, isn't it? Absolutely. I'd love to hear your thoughts on all of that. Do you give us a call? 0344 499 1000. Up next, we're going to talk to Alp Mehmet of Migration Watch on the Home Secretary Yvette Cooper refusing to set any date, any timetable for cutting those small boat crossings. But why won't she? This is Talk, the home of common sense.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
Very good morning to you. This is Talk, the home of common sense. 11:37 is the time. Up next, we're going to be talking to James McMurdoch, one of the Reform UK MPs, about, Reform's threat to the Tories. And indeed, will Reform be naming the Chinese spy H6 in the House of Commons later today? First up, though, let's talk about the Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper. She's been out and about doing various interviews and talking about, isn't it terrible, hand-wring about all these Channel migrants coming over to Britain and inability to get rid of an awful lot of them. The numbers over the weekend, even in December, still sky high in their hundreds. But she's refused once again to set any timetable, to set any date, start or end date, for cutting those small boat crossings. Let's talk about this with Alp Mehmet, Chairman of Migration Watch UK. Very good morning to you, Alp.
Good morning.
Thank you so much for joining us. Now, Alp, why do you think that the Home Secretary has decided not to give us a timetable or a date?
Simple, because she's not going to be able to do it. That's why. Keir Starmer, in his not a reset speech, effectively said that. He may as well have said it. He said, I'm not going to give you a target or a date because you'll notice when I fail and you'll only keep on about it.
Yeah, I mean, he didn't. It wasn't one of his wasn't one of his 6 milestones deliberately because he didn't want to set himself up like Rishi Sunak with his stop the boats. But it was really interesting. And asked about this yesterday, Yvette Cooper repeatedly said in an interview, she said, look, I don't think that the public want us to set these arbitrary deadlines, these arbitrary numbers. Well, exactly. I just thought, no, what we don't want is politicians to set them and then fail to deliver on them.
Exactly. I smash the gangs. Frankly, it's more of a sham than a smash. Yeah. They've done nothing of the sort, and they're not going to do anything like that. The gangs won't be smashed. And what they haven't said, I mean, they've been trumpeting the fact that they've sent 13,400 or whatever it is back. What they haven't said is that the vast majority of those, probably around 70%, are voluntary, for goodness sake. They want to go back to their own countries.
They're getting a flight back for Christmas, some of them.
Not only are they getting a flight back for Christmas, but they're getting £3,000 each, a lot of them. We know that 609 Brazilians were sent back in the summer, including children. They all got £3,000 each. That's nearly £2 million, for goodness sake. If 70% of the 13,400 were to be given £3,000 each, and we should be told, frankly, if they were, that's about £30 million.
Wow. And basically that is just a bribe. It's literally, can you get on the plane without us having to drag you kicking and screaming and peeing?
It is a bribe because they want to go back anyway. But if they hang out and say, well, I'm not going to go unless you give me the money, they say, well, here we are. Here's £3,000.
It is absolutely extraordinary, I think, to most people. You might argue, oh, well, if they refuse and they did the appeals, it would cost us more. I don't care. It's the principle of the darn thing that matters, isn't it? I mean, this is it. Well, we know that the Tories lost complete control over this. Labour lost control of it before the Tories. Tories lost control of it. Labour, I don't know anyone who thinks that the Labour Party has either the will or the means to actually deliver on this issue at all. They certainly haven't given any indication yet that they have the wherewithal to do it. They haven't got a clue, frankly. That's why numbers are, even in December, shooting up, as they often do. But 35,000 people already crossed the channel. We don't know how many of those that have been returned were actually cross-channelers, those who've come illegally. Many of them will have been offenders of one form or another. Well, I think Yvette Cooper also mentioned, I think a lot of these people are people who've overstayed their visas. But another thing she was asked, they arrived legally and then they've started working, they've overstayed on a student visa or a tourist visa. So what was really interesting, actually, is she was asked, do you have any numbers, I think by Trevor Phillips on Sky, do you have any numbers for how many people are here illegally? And he quoted a figure that has been suggested around 1 million. I believe it's actually thought to be by you guys rather more than that, and that was about 10 years ago, I think, the million figure.
Definitely is more than that.
But she said, well, we don't know, and we have no way of knowing. I think this is one of the things that a lot of people find extraordinary. You have to have your passport, checked and stamped. Most people have passports that, they're the e-passports now. People, you should know who's in the country and who's not in the country. How do we not know that there are 1 million plus people in this country who aren't allowed to be here?
Well, because the check at the border now, which is as often as not done by a machine, simply establishes that you are the individual that is there on the passport. Your photo is the right one. When you go through, all that happens when your passport is checked by electronically is that, yes, this is indeed Julia Hartley-Brewer. and she is the rightful holder of this passport. There's no permission given to come in as such.
They can't have a note in, so someone who arrives...
More importantly, Juliet, there's no record kept.
No, exactly.
That's the whole thing.
That's the thing, is I don't understand in this modern day and age why they can't have a record so that, whoever it is, John Smith arrives, he'd come in this country, and he's got a stamp, he's allowed to be here for 3 months, that there isn't someone that automatically flags up after 3 months, and if at that point he's going in and out, or he's flagged up anywhere at any point, that he's not instantly picked up. I don't understand when we are constantly... We're having to provide ID all the time. People have, bank cards, which are, linked to their... You have to show ID at your bank. Why? There seems to be joined-up thinking when we don't want it and no joined-up thinking when we do want it.
Well, we used to do that, frankly. Many years ago, we did record people who were coming in on limited leave, someone who was coming in for... to work, someone who was coming in to study. That was recorded, and when they left, then they completed a little embarkation card, and the information there was married up with the information when they entered. That isn't happening anymore.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of basics. It's absolutely basic stuff. It is quite extraordinary. Yeah, well, I've got no hopes that things are going to improve on that front. I don't think you have either. Alt Mehmet, though, you've been fantastic at Migration Watch UK from bringing this issue to the fore. You and I have been talking about this stuff for a heck of a long time, longer than Yvette Cooper has, that's for sure. Alt Mehmet, thank you. Sam Armstrong, it is extraordinary that we can't deal with, people who've arrived here legally and are now still here illegally. And then that if we did move to, as Donald Trump is looking at, mass deportations, the outcry from the liberal media would be extraordinary, whereas I would completely expect that I would be expelled from a country if I wasn't allowed to be there legally, or was working when I wasn't allowed to. I would think that was an obvious thing and a reasonable, just thing to happen. But then we deal with the channel migrants, the illegal migrants, and we are even more scared of those because we don't know who these people are. Most of them don't produce ID. The abject failure of the last government, the abject failure of this government, I think the future abject failure, is writ large. As I've been saying for years, any government that fails to deal with this, any party that fails to tackle this, the British people are going to find someone who will.
Julia, these people don't care. They don't care. I mean, that's why our systems are literally a joke, that we don't know who is and isn't coming out of the country, right? It is built upon a basis that they believe that we, the British public, despite the fact that mass deportations are actually one of the things that polls the most strongly in this country, enormous public support in order to remove each and every person who is here illegally.
Do we each get to pick someone?
But despite that, they just don't care. They just think they can continue to pull the wool over our eyes for years, if not decades.
They think we're stupid. This is my thing. Do they think we're stupid and we just don't notice it?
They don't. They think that we are sufficiently pliable, they're sufficiently liable to. They think that their opponents are going to make too little a thing of it because, by the way, there's a conspiracy of silence on this question, that they can basically get away with it, and they would rather do that. They would rather live with the occasional questions from the likes of Talk TV than actually having to do the really difficult and unpleasant things for them, i.e. changing our human rights framework, i.e. building a system that actually removes people. No ifs, no buts.
At least the Tories sort of sounded like they wanted to do with it. They were just utterly hopeless and incompetent. I know you've worked for a lot of the people involved in government, but
it's
a fair summary. But I don't even believe that there is any will from the Labour Party to do with this. I'm sure years ago, when she actually would agree to interviews by me, wouldn't anymore, obviously. But asking, give me a number of the number of people who should come and live here, under whatever circumstances, to the nearest million. I'll take the. Give me a number to the nearest million. Genuinely, I don't think she actually believes in borders. I think she's one of those citizens of nowhere. No one's illegal. Everyone can go live wherever they want, people. And I'm not sure that flies. Anyway, 11:47 is the time. We're going to talk about this up next with James McMurdoch. He's a Reform UK MP for South Basildon. Talk about that threat from Reform to the Tories. But are Labour far too relaxed? Or are they just hoping that Reform keeps splitting the right-wing vote? We'll talk about that up next. This is Talk, the home of common sense.
I mean, look at all this nonsense we have about happy holidays and happy over the festive season. It's Christmas.
Why are politicians generally frightened of doing something about this?
Because the Muslim Council of Great Britain takes it upon itself, and it doesn't represent all Muslims, although they care to pretend they do, tries to take it upon themselves that, you know, they represent all Muslims.
Well, they don't. Why should we listen to them? You want to follow a religion,
they will
keep it to yourself.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
Very good morning to you. This is Talk, the home of common sense, with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. Delighted to welcome to the show now. First time, actually, getting a chat to him, James McMurdoch, Reform UK MP for South Basildon. Very good morning to you, James.
Hi, Julia. Thank you very much for having me.
Well, thanks so much for joining us. Lots to talk to you about. And first of all, we've just been talking about the migration numbers and Yvette Cooper, the Home Secretary, refusing to set a timetable for cutting those small boat crossings. And I've been saying for a long time, you know, if the Tories won't do it, Labour won't do it, people will turn to a party that will do it. Is that the key issue that you think Reform can benefit from voters on?
It's certainly one of the biggest issues, undoubtedly, and I think Reform are sort of head and shoulders ahead of the rest when it comes to sort of trust on the issue. But it isn't the only issue. You know, we do recognise that people have a cost of living crisis as well. Net zero is making people poorer. But in terms of the immigration, I think people really have had enough. And we've reached a stage where it slightly beggars belief in terms of how we've got here, because the message has been loud and clear from the people that things are moving in a direction which the population generally are becoming quite uncomfortable with, and that you know, it seems that our government to a certain extent has lost control, which I think should be a sort of warning sign or a reason for concern for anyone. So yeah, Reform absolutely need to sort of step in and make sure people know that their voice is being listened to in Parliament.
And how crucial will be big donors like the billionaire property developer Nick Candy, the richest man in the world, Elon Musk? Nick Candy has already said he wants to give at least £1 million to you as a party. Elon Musk has talked about $100 million, asking, you know, when's the next big electoral battle? Of course, the local elections next May. Nigel Farage replied to him on social media. How important is having that money to sort of back up the campaigns, to pay for the billboards, pay for stuff? How crucial do you think that's going to be? And especially this to an MP who, you know, you only won by a very sort of tiny majority, and were frankly a bit of a surprise for your party leader Nigel Farage on the day after the election.
Yeah, it certainly was. I mean, that's the thing. These mega donors do play an important role, and they certainly help level the playing field for a new sort of start-up party like ours that's looking to really step in and help the British electorate. But they're only a small part of the picture. It has to be a grassroots movement as well, which it is, which is exactly what we saw in the last election, with virtually no budget, no funding, no time to organise, no ground game. We still got the 4.1 million votes, you know, and I'm living proof of that. My largest donor was a lady called Barbara, who I'll forever be indebted to, who gave me £50, and she's still my largest donor. So Nick Candy and Elon Musk, I'm sure, could change that quite easily if they so wanted to. But that's not the point. They are just helping us to level the playing field so we can professionalise and help get our country right back on track, because that's what we need, that's what we want.
Let me ask you about two of the big stories in the news today. One is this, I'd say it keeps being referred to as a model She's just a woman who sells her body on the internet, on OnlyFans. This is Victoria Thomas Bowen. She's the one who threw the banana milkshake at Nigel Farage in Clacton-on-Sea while he was campaigning the general election. Extraordinarily, she has avoided jail. She's refused to apologise. In her police interview, said she didn't regret doing it. She eventually pleaded guilty to assault by beating and also to criminal damage to a security officer's jacket. She's been given a 3-month sentence, suspended for a year in order to carry out 120 hours of unpaid work. It is extraordinary that somebody who threw a substance he didn't know at the time, it was milkshake, could have been anything else, into the face of someone campaigning in a democratic election, that she has avoided jail, not expressing any regret whatsoever for the crime she committed. And yet people who've written tweets online, tweets that they often deleted within minutes or within hours, have faced proper, real jail time. What do you make of this?
Yeah, I mean, clearly her attitude absolutely stinks. I don't know if she's getting some benefit out of it, which, is a bit of a damning testament to the state of the world today.
You mean more men are going to look at this this cheap woman's OnlyFans page because we're saying a name? I mean, well done her, eh? Her parents must be so proud.
Well, exactly, and I'm glad you said that. Yeah, it's infamy at a cheap price. It's not something that I would want for my daughters, but who knows what's going through her head? It's clearly not the way I would like her to be thinking.
Should she have gone to jail?
I couldn't say on that. I mean, it was right that Nigel pressed charges because there could be anything, and a clear message has to be sent, because you cannot have terrible behaviour like this escalating. It absolutely needs to be nipped in the bud, and I really hope that the judge's sentence does that. Her attitude does stink, but perhaps that's a bit of a persona, and hopefully behind closed doors she's a bit more sober about it. But yeah, in fact, I won't talk about it now because I haven't made it public, but there's another piece of work I'm working on that I hope will reflect British public's view on sentencing compared to how horrific the crime might be felt by the general public versus the punishment. You've absolutely right example with, I'm not going to play it down. Some words are disgusting.
Yep.
Absolute disgusting, deserve condemnation, but I don't necessarily think deserve severe prison sentences. So, physical assault versus mean words, I certainly know which I think is worse.
Absolutely. I think most sensible people do as well. What about also a rather more serious crime, and the crime of international espionage? A Chinese spy has been expelled from the country, banned from ever returning, after it was emerged that he had a 10-year close business relationship. He was a close confidant, one of Prince Andrew's aides said, with the Duke of York. The big concern about this Chinese spy, known only as H6, able to reach into the top echelons of British establishment, met prime ministers, went to Buckingham Palace and the like as part of this spy network. He is not allowed to be named in this country, even though his name's all over the internet, all over American media, and extraordinarily Chinese media. He's only known as H6 here. We understand that your party members, your colleagues, are planning to name this alleged Chinese spy in the House of Commons today using parliamentary privilege. Do you know if that's going to happen, and who's going to do it?
I believe both Richard and Nigel have confirmed that they would do it, but let me please be very clear. I haven't had a direct conversation with them about this topic, so if I'm mistaken there, let me just be open about it. I believe they are. We have to be very, very careful with our relationships with the world. We want to be in friendly competition with these huge players, but we also want a level playing field wherever we can, which means underhanded tactics like that need to be put to bed very quickly. And I suspect if the rationale behind naming this person is so we can kind of blow the doors off the topic and prevent any further damage.
Yeah, that would certainly be the case. Extraordinary, especially if the rest of the world's allowed to know who he is. James McMurdoch, Reform UK MP for South Basildon, thank you very much indeed for that. Just briefly from you, Sam Armstrong, I mean, this is a freedom of speech issue, isn't it?
Yeah, totally. And look, it's incredibly serious, and you could literally go to prison in this country for naming who this person is. And
even though it's all over the internet everywhere else.
Yeah, but it strikes me that it's hugely in the public interest, that the public have a right to know who this individual is, what sort of person they are, how it was that they got access to
and other people possibly being able to come forward to say, yeah, they'd had links with this guy, and we can find out just how far this sort of spy network runs. Look, it's fascinating. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Do give us a call, 0344 499 1000. Up next, we are going to be talking to the Shadow Housing Secretary, Kevin Hollinrake MP. That's coming up next. This is Talk, the home of common sense.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
A very, very good afternoon to you. This is Talk, the home of common sense, with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. Whether you're listening on DAB+ radio or on your smart speaker, watching on YouTube or on your connected device, it's great to have your company. Great also to have the company of commentator Sam Armstrong. If you're just tuning in, yes, this is my voice this week. It's just getting worse and worse. Sam Armstrong struggled. I'm so grateful to you for making it in today, given that I gave you my horrible lurgy and you're feeling the pain of it as well today. So at least we're just trapped in a studio, just as, you know, infecting each other, no one else today.
I don't think we can reinfect ourselves.
Can you? I don't know. But let's go back to COVID days, can we, apparently? Should we all be wearing masks?
Well, you should. Our very own super spreader.
I am. Honestly, I've taken the whole office out with this. I really have. Office Christmas party tomorrow night. They are not going to be popular with me. I'm not going to be popular with them. Can't even speak anymore. Anyway, you only got another hour of listening to this. Then, of course, Ian Collins will be here from 1 o'clock. Let me tell you what is happening in the next hour. Going to talk more about Keir Starmer setting up his surrender squad of more than 100 civil servants ready to junk Brexit for closer EU ties. 100, I mean, genuinely, more than 100 civil servants. As we know, the former chief Brexit negotiator, Lord Frost, who coined this phrase, the surrender squad, he said he didn't have anything close to 100 civil servants when he was negotiating Brexit. So why does Keir Starmer need that many when it comes to resetting our relations with Brussels? Do you trust him not to try and take us back into the EU by the back door? Frankly, I think he'd do it by the front door. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Give us a call, 0344 499 1000. You can text the word TALK to 87222. Send us a message on X at Talk TV. Calls are charged at the national rate. Text costs £1, standard network rate message message. Also going to talk more about that damning poll, which has found that voters believe Keir Starmer is the worst Prime Minister in modern history, just after only 5 months into the job. And Foreign Secretary David Lammy says that Britain has made diplomatic contact with HTS, that's the rebel group that toppled the Assad regime in Syria, as he's announced £50 million of your and my money in humanitarian aid for Syria. But how do we make sure that money gets to the right people? Plus, Labour ministers have handed train drivers a 75% pay hike for doing overtime. They're not required to work at weekends, which is why you can never get a train on a Sunday. Pretty much every train on the in and out of London was seen to be cancelled yesterday, but maybe they'll be persuaded to bother to work on a Sunday from now on. Anyway, we'll talk about all of that. Plenty more besides. Do keep your calls coming in about all of the topics we're talking about. 0344 499 1000. Lots of texts and tweets coming in about the surrender squad over Europe. We'll get to more of those coming up very soon as well. First up, though, let's go to my first guest in this hour, Shadow Housing Secretary, Conservative MP Kevin Hollinrake. A very good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon, Julia.
Oh, sounds like you've got the cough as well. Let's do it.
I'm okay. As bad as you are, darling.
There's lots I want to talk to you about, and including, obviously, your brief in housing's very much been in the news. But can I just start with this Chinese spy, H6, as we're only allowed to know him as, an alleged Chinese spy, banned, from entering the country, thrown out. The rest of the world knows his name. We're not allowed to know his name because of a court order today, which we think is going to be undermined today by either Nigel Farage or Richard Tice of Reform UK, naming him using the parliamentary privilege. But we've had Prince Andrew, close contacts with this guy, close confidant, he's been described as, and yet, Prince Andrew, obviously, he's got some question marks over his perhaps judgment of who would be a good close confidant and who wouldn't. But how damaging and how worrying do you think this spy scandal is?
Well, it's a real concern because it wasn't just an informal chat. I don't think they had. This is an ongoing relationship, and clearly Prince Andrew has a very senior role to play in our country, of course, and. We know the Chinese have form at this, in terms of trying to infiltrate various different parts of our society, be it politics or business or whatever else. And we know they can be a nefarious influence at times. So it's very important. I can't understand, actually, why he was advised why he wasn't advised to sever this relationship or not let it develop.
Well, he was also advised to sever Jeffrey Epstein's, but maybe he couldn't get the Chinese spy to lend him a house for him to come and stay in, so he could say, I want to sever my relationship.
Strange, very strange. He must have been advised not to have that relationship, and yet did it anyway. So it needs a proper investigation. We don't know the detailed facts yet. We should find out exactly what's happened before we make a final judgment on this. But it looks very serious to me.
But your government was, you were part of a Conservative government for years. David Cameron, there's a picture of David Cameron and Theresa May both with this Chinese spy. We don't know how, whether they had anything other than a glad hand at a function, and it doesn't mean nothing more serious than that. But we know, your government was quite happy to, give the 5G contract to Huawei, a Chinese firm that is completely beholden to the Chinese state. So many governments in recent years, Tory and Labour alike, have been happy to sell Britain to the Chinese, fully knowing that this is a state that uses these spy tactics and is a hostile, undemocratic, totalitarian, murderous regime. Is it just always the money that talks loudest?
No, not at all. And as you know, Julia, we pulled out the Huawei contract from our 5G networks. And
kicking and screaming.
I don't think that's right at all. Clearly, there's different views in government about these things, but that's exactly what we did, and it was right to do that. And we've taken an ever more cautious approach with China. Of course, we collaborate in certain areas. That's the right thing to do, whether it be particularly international trade, as long as that is fair trade. And I think many of us can see that that's not been the case in the past. So I think we need to be cautious. We need to engage, but be very cautious. One of the things I'm very concerned about from my brief is the calling in of the Chinese super embassy on the Royal Mint side, which it looks like the Chinese Premier President Xi has has lent on the Prime Minister, and he's lent on the Deputy Prime Minister, and now that application has been called in by Angela Rayner.
And when you say it's called in, basically the local council said we don't want to have your big super embassy in this territory near Tower Hill, near the Tower of London. But basically the government saying when they call it in, it means they can override that.
Taking responsibility for it, which doesn't look good. It looks, it's come as a result of direct political influence, which they admitted, which is extraordinary.
Yeah, well, that's the worry, isn't it? Again, there is so much money sloshing around, so much influence economically, and not just military, but economically, that they do have that influence. Talking of trade, let's talk about the EU briefly. The former Brexit chief negotiator, former, obviously, Tory cabinet minister, Lord Frost, has accused Keir Starmer of setting up a surrender squad of 100 civil servants, basically trying to undo Brexit, reset our relationship with the EU. We're all very happy to have trading links with the EU. I thought we'd really got those, but do you think that Keir Starmer, a man who was shadow Brexit secretary, spent 3 years trying to stop the Brexit referendum ever being enacted. Do you think he's going to try and take us back into the EU by the back door?
Yes, effectively. I think exactly what he'll do. He's clearly looking at free movement. He's all the time in opposition. He tried to frustrate our attempts to leave the European Union. And then when we'd left, then he tried to make the case for a much closer relationship, which was bound to involve being a member of the single market and customs union, bound to involve free movement of people, bound to involve things like a veterinary agreement, which will ease frictions at the borders, no doubt about that, but it then locks you out of trade agreements in other parts of the world. We just agreed the CPTPP trade agreement.
This is the Trans-Pacific,
Trans-Pacific. We're looking at the US. We were looking at the US, the Gulf, India. All these are opportunities. Can I just remind your viewers that 73% of our exports are not goods to the European Union.
Yeah.
They are services. We're the second largest exporter in the world of services, and the goods to the rest of the world. There are huge opportunities with international trade. Europe's one of our markets, an important one. But the US, on a country-by-country basis, is our biggest market. It would make perfect sense to build on those agreements and with many other countries around the world whose economies are growing more quickly. So there are opportunities there without going cap in hand to the European Union and saying, please, what do you want? And we want this. What do you want? And we know with Starmer and Reeves and Rayner, they are terrible negotiators.
Yeah.
Look at what they did with the train drivers, which you just referenced in your bulletin. I mean, it's just frightening what these people are capable of doing or not capable of doing, which is negotiating a decent agreement. I think the European Union, the European Commission will see him coming, and I think we'll get a terrible deal.
Absolutely run ring around them. Now, you mentioned the economy. Now, this comes to your remit. We've had a lot of announcements in the last week or so from Angela Rayner, your opposite number, Deputy Prime Minister and Housing Secretary, about boosting house building in this country. They've got this target, 1.5 million homes, 300,000 homes a year, it works out, although they're saying that they'll be built more towards the end of the Parliament. But then we discovered, and I wrote a piece in The Sun saying, fully support this. We need to build more homes. We've only been, I think, on average, 220,000 a year. Not enough. I don't even think 300,000 a year is enough. But it now emerges, British House Building Federation, or others saying, look, we haven't actually got anyone to build all these houses. We haven't got the builders, we haven't got the plasterers, the scaffolders, the bricklayers, we haven't got any of these people. Realistically, are we going to, if there is going to be this house building project, assuming the planning changes go through, assuming we actually get some, epic, big mass building projects, do you think we're just going to have to import all those people, or have we got enough homegrown people that we can train up?
Well, if you want to get the builders building, the first thing he should try and do is encourage them to invest. And instead, all we've seen from Labour is taxing the life out of business. And we know that they're less likely to hire as a result, and they're less likely to invest because they've taken £25 billion, they've been hit by £25 billion of business taxation. And we've seen from the house builders that's hit them. And then there's the capacity problems, as you say, in terms of skills. But even worse than all that, Julia, I'm sure you've seen the figures, but this is what I've described as a war on rural England. What they've done, they've cut the targets for house building in Newcastle, in Coventry, in Birmingham, in London, and they've massively increased the targets in rural areas. So Westmoreland up 600%, 600%, a six-fold increase. You're seeing
a seven-fold increase.
It is sevenfold, okay, great. Oh, well, it's not
100% is double. Sorry, an economist. I'm unlike Rachel Reeves. I can do the numbers.
100% double there, definitely. I thought the numbers were sixfold, but okay, maybe it's a sevenfold.
600% is sevenfold.
Okay, yes, okay, right. There you go then. But I think it's 500% on that basis.
Okay, right then.
Another way around. Anyway,
I'm sorry. I threw you there. It's an ongoing complaint of mine that people don't understand these things. But anyway,
I'll make sure I get the numbers right.
No, but can I come in there, because you say, well, this is terrible because they're cutting the numbers in the constituencies which they're more likely to represent because they don't want to upset local people by riding roughshod over people's planning complaints. However, the reality is an awful lot of urban areas are already very, very, very busy places. It's obvious that building in the areas which are not already massively built up would make sense. Your government was going to do it until there was a big outcry from the MPs and the shires. You were going to do exactly the same thing. We need more homes. You guys were happy to import millions more people to this country. They need somewhere to live. People who are born here need somewhere to live. So you're going to have to put homes somewhere. Doesn't it make sense to put them in rural areas, building up the towns there, rather than overcrowding already crowded urban areas?
There's so many questions there. The first one I want to deal with is I was not happy to bring all those people in the UK, and my colleagues weren't either. We were...
They were given visas.
We got things wrong initially, but we've cut with them. We tightened the rules up. Those numbers have started to come down, and will come down a lot further if we were in charge. But in terms of the distribution of the housing delivery, of course, every area should take its fair share. There's no question about it. But that's not what's happening. How can it be right to see a 50% cut in some of the cities across the UK and a sixfold increase across rural areas? How can that be right? On average, urban areas are seeing a 1% increase in targets. The rest of the country, the rural areas, a 100% increase.
But again, it doesn't really matter. It doesn't really matter what the increase or the decrease is in the target. It matters the number of homes, doesn't it? What the actual number of homes is that they're going to build. Because actually, it's much harder to build in rural areas than in urban areas, because urban areas have got these brownfield sites where you can pretty much get permission.
No, I think you're misunderstanding what an urban area is. Urban areas they can have urban extensions. They can go into greenfield sites at the edge of cities, the edge of towns, which is the easiest way to do them because you've got services there. You see, in rural areas, it's much more difficult to do that. I agree in terms of the expansion of numbers, increasing numbers, and we did that over the last 10 years. The last 10 years we're in office was a record, a decade-long, 50-year record of housing delivery, 207,000 a year in new homes addition. We need more, of course. I agree.
That doesn't touch the size compared to the number of people you imported.
As I said, we need more, and we also wanted to step those numbers up. But we've got to do it in a way that is fair and sustainable. And this is not fair, not deliverable, not sustainable. And it is deliberate. It's a deliberate targeting of seats they do not represent or think they won't represent in the future. I think that's totally wrong. The other thing is, as a centre for cities, you'll say, the reason you put housing in big conurbations is because that's where the jobs are. It makes perfect sense to put them there.
Well, it makes perfect sense until the people who live at the end of the road can't find anywhere to park their car, and they can't get on a bus because there's more and more people, because you don't build the infrastructure to match it.
Of course, you need the infrastructure as well.
There isn't anywhere to do that because you're in the centre of a city.
I don't accept that. Of course, you need to create more roads and more doctors and dental surgery and schools
but
and
we
those
don't.
kind of things.
But we don't.
Yes, we do. We put £600 billion into transport infrastructure in the last Parliament, Julia. Yes, we do. So, yes, we do.
Yeah, I mean, a load of money spent on HS2 consultants doesn't actually create any extra railways or buses or doctors' surgeries for people. Come on, Kevin.
That was a small fraction of what was spent, actually, in terms of HS2. There's much more spent on regional roads and railways.
I want to get to two other stories now. You, of course, were one of the ministers responsible for the Post Office during this period in which Post Office postmasters and mistresses were trying to get sort of compensation and just get justice for the outrage that they've been through at the hands of the Post Office and the Horizon scandal. You were actually one of the few who actually got the thumbs up from many of those postmasters and postmistresses as someone who got to grips with it, who was working hard, and all credit to you for that. And we've spoken to you about it on the show before. Today is the final day of the inquiry into the Post Office Horizon scandal. Closing statements today. Do you think, I mean, it'll probably be many months before we actually get the final inquiry report. Do you think we will finally see sort of justice done, a full account of what has happened, and fingers pointed to people, and at some point criminal action being taken against those who basically committed a horrible wrongdoing against so many innocent men and women?
Well, justice will only be served when all the postmasters have been compensated and somebody has gone to jail for what happened. And I won't name who I think should go to jail, but I've watched the inquiry closely.
Oh, go on.
Well, you know, the accountability has to stop. Has to end with the person at the top of an organisation, and clearly that, you know, the evidence that was given by Paula Vanells and others was pretty damning, I think, by her and by other people around her. So, but that's a matter for the police, of course, the Met Police, and for the Crown Prosecution Service. It will take, I think, from what I've read, 1 or 2 years for that to come to pass in terms of prosecutions. But one of the last things I did in office was to write to the Chief Constable to say, a Commissioner of the Met Police to say, you know, what's going on? Will you please hurry up?
Yeah, because that's been going on. I think the first police inquiries were in 2019, weren't they? And we're still, here we are 5 years later, still waiting for any action. Just finally, in terms of police and courts, just finally, Nigel Farage, of course, you'll remember, he got banana milkshake thrown over him while he was campaigning in Claxton-on-Sea ahead of the last general election. The OnlyFans model who sells her body on the internet to any man who will pay to look at her, Victoria Thomas-Bowen, she threw the banana milkshake. She actually eventually did plead guilty to assault by beating and also to criminal damage. She has not been given a jail sentence, though. She's been handed a 13-week sentence, suspended for a year. She'll have to do 120 hours of unpaid work. But she's expressed no regret. She has refused to apologise to Nigel Farage. No remorse whatsoever. People who wrote tweets after the Southport attacks have been sent to prison. This woman committed an assault on a Democratic politician during a campaign. Should she have gone to jail?
Well, there's some crazy sentencing going on, as you say. Some people just say something and they get sent to jail, and some people do something and they don't. It seems it's out of kilter to me, and not just in this particular case. And you know, I abhor that kind of behaviour from anybody. And you know, freedom of speech is so important. You might not agree with what Nigel says, but we should all defend his right to say it. So. So it's, you know, it's difficult to comment on this particular case, but it sounds odd and perverse to me.
OK, well, thank you very much indeed for joining us, Kevin Hollingwake. Thank you for that. He's the Shadow Housing Secretary, Conservative MP. Just to let you know, we'd mentioned the Chinese spy story then, you and I, obviously, Sam Armstrong, we've been talking about that throughout the show. A hearing is going to take place today at the Royal Courts of Justice, just an hour after we come off air. Ian Collins will be here, according to court listings, a hearing about the anonymity of the alleged Chinese spy linked to the Duke of York. This will obviously be media organisations saying we want the right to name this man, not just call him H6, given that he is known, including in the Chinese media, American media, anywhere on the internet, by his actual name. Sam Armstrong, do you think the courts are going to have to overturn that? And that may actually preclude the likes of Nigel Farage and Richard Tice of Reform from naming him using parliamentary privilege later?
Yes, it seems to me an overwhelming likelihood. Look, this is an emergency listing, which I think shows how seriously the court is taking it. They found this time at such short notice. And look, I think that, frankly, the order was becoming unworkable. I don't think there were many people that wanted to know, didn't know the name of this individual. And that is the challenge of the internet age and of this injunction.
But also, I don't see why someone who lost their right to stay here, who was expelled from this country, is banned from coming to this country, I don't understand why he would have a right to anonymity. On what basis?
Well, to me, it was farcical from the start. And there is a huge public interest in the public knowing the types of people that are coming in here, what kind of pretense they're using, what kind of cover they're using. Because, look, many people in the establishment will know people that are coming from overseas countries, and they want to know, what are the kind of signs that I'm looking out for? So
we've had people working for MPs, we've got big donors, these people, you know, business figures, you know, close confidant of Prince Andrew.
And anyone who knows anything about Chinese spying will tell you it's different to Russian spying. It's not dead drops and covered big coats and meeting in the embassy. It involves an awful lot more people at an awful lot lower level, and it involves different kind of influence and exploitation.
And again, it's like economic espionage, more so than the military. But again, that is probably how and technological espionage and getting that access to the top levels, being able to walk into Buckingham Palace. I mean, come on. I mean, it is staggering, isn't it? And again, as you say, earlier, Prince Andrew, this is a Chinese spy is not even his worst choice of close confidant friend after Jeffrey Epstein. But we know this is a man who's been a useful idiot for an awful lot of bad people over the years, not least, even just down to who he sold his South York ranch to.
Yeah, I mean, this person has caused... It's the person who's gone into Buckingham Palace who's caused the most damage since Andrew invited Emily Maitlis in.
Anyway, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. Also want to hear from you about this surrender squad of more than 100 civil servants set up, basically, on your and my dime. We're paying their wages. I bet these ones even bother coming to work and not sitting at home on their sofas for a change. But actually, their aim is to get closer ties with the EU. What they mean by that is undermining Brexit. Do you trust Keir Starmer to try and undermine Brexit, or to uphold that democratic vote, biggest vote for anything in this country's history? I'd love to hear your thoughts. So 344 499 1000 is the number. This is Talk.
Day and age, we don't have proper backup systems for all of these, very complicated electronic scenarios.
Well, it's so interesting that the burden falls on the airline. So the airline obviously pays the air traffic control company to do some air traffic controlling. But if it goes wrong, the people who are on the hook are the airlines, because they have to. Everyone, for instance, on the Ryanair flight to Bratislava, which didn't go last night, has to be put up in a hotel at Ryanair's expense, given all their meals, and then found another flight.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
A very good afternoon to you. This is indeed Talk. I love that my voice is basically the same as that man is Talk. This is Talk, the home of common sense, with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer, and an equally husky Sam Armstrong. Lots more to talk about in the next hour, or next half hour. We're going to be talking to Andrew Fox about the latest from Syria and also Israel and Gaza as well. And also the train drivers' pay hike might persuade them to actually bother to turn up on a Sunday, so you don't have the nonsense of half the trains on a Sunday being cancelled because the train operating companies don't even know until sort of 6 o'clock on Sunday morning who's working. We're a first world country. It's an absolute joke, isn't it, Sam? Absolute joke.
That nothing works in this country anymore. Nothing, painful. Julia. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. But Keir Starmer's giving us just what the doctor ordered. Another year of
absolutely.
Mass migration.
Well, not based on those poll ratings. Just let you know, Nigel Farage has just tweeted the last few moments about that just extraordinary punishment not of the OnlyFans seller of her own body, Victoria. I'm sorry. I was raised as a feminist, and I'm just not entirely sure these young women thinking that, you know, putting your body on the internet for strange men to look at and ask you to do things. I'm just not entirely sure that's the empowerment you ladies seem to think it is. I say lady. Obviously not in Victoria Thomas Bowen's case. She's the one who threw that banana milkshake over Nigel Farage. She did plead guilty to assault by beating and indeed to criminal damage for damage to a security guard's suit. But I mean, just extraordinary that she hasn't been sent to prison when people have written hurty tweets have been sent to prison. Nigel Farage has tweeted, "We now live in a country where you can assault a member of parliament." To be fair, he wasn't a member of parliament then, he was a candidate, and not go to prison. The latest example of two-tier justice. And it is two-tier justice. It's just absurd. Let's go to your messages coming in about the surrender squad, these 100 civil servants working for Keir Starmer, ostensibly to create closer ties with the EU, but actually to undo Brexit. That is the allegation from Lord Frost. He was our chief negotiator on Brexit. He calls it a surrender squad. Boris Johnson has chimed in as well and saying Brexit's going to be undermined. I don't know anyone who doesn't think that Keir Starmer would at the first opportunity try to undermine Brexit. But let's get to some of your messages coming in thick and fast. Barbara has said democracy's flying out of the window. Greg says sack him as soon as possible. Constant lies, no closer ties with the EU. John says everything Starmer does ensures the complete collapse of Labour as a serious contender in any future elections. He's driven by his blinkered globalist approach. Damien says we all know what Labour want: rejoining the EU by stealth, free movement, access to our waters. Full access to Britain's fishing waters is one of the requirements. I mean, what is even the point of us having voted in 2016? He says, and then bowing down to EU regulations. Paul says we voted to leave the single market and the customs union and to end free movement. I fear that if he goes back on this, then it will lead to more riots. Katie says, I think the King should prorogue Parliament and sack the PM for not serving the British people and lying to them. Oh, we're up there with that petition, aren't we? That's going to get debated as well, isn't it, in Parliament? And Colin says, 100 civil servants, how much is this going to cost the British taxpayer? What about the freezing pensioners? What about the young farmers who are going to lose their inheritance? Linda says, at this point, I would take it. She says, Brexit unfortunately allowed the establishment to bring in millions of non-Europeans. The EU was the gate holding back the flood. No, Brexit didn't honestly, Brexit was going to do that. That was a decision by Boris Johnson to open the doors to anyone and everyone who could come from abroad. They were already coming from abroad. That was entirely. There was nothing to do with Brexit at all. We were always entitled to bring people or to not bring people in from outside the EU. So that's an absolute. What is the opposite of a smoking gun? Neil says it was only a matter of time after he was elected. The Remainers will never go away, but to be honest, we never got the Brexit we voted for. Johnson was just as treacherous as Starmer is now. Wow, there's a lot of unhappiness and cynicism on a Monday, isn't there? Let's go to David, who's on the line. He's called in on 0344 499 1000. And David, you're in Exeter, and what do you want to say?
So just regarding Starmer's surrender squad, as he's sitting there in what's now a EU regional management office in Whitehall, I'm going to link from Frost, because actually this is critical, because one of the things Frost resisted was he didn't want a rigid defence agreement or defence union, us to go into defence union with the EU. Well, Starmer, I'm going to submit, is exactly doing that in his as his policy, where he wanted a pact. But this is where the devil's in the detail. So I'm in good company with this because Sir Richard Dearlove has highlighted this at parliamentary committees with concerns. So Ursula has stated in terms, so this is Ursula von der Leyen, head of the EU, former German defence minister, has stated in terms she wants common defence union for all of the existing military in Europe, but that will include all of the defence industry in Europe. She wants to unify that into single point.
It's an absolute disaster.
She has stated, this is the critical bit people need to get from the civilian side of stuff, and the industry, the research, the development and manufacturing, is that she wants to appoint one single EU defence contractor to facilitate all of the platforms and systems that the EU is going to procure. Now, think of this. They want to go into this defence union. It's as big as currency union, like the euro. Now, what will that mean? What's the impact for Rolls-Royce, BAE and Babcock and all the companies that then circle around them?
Yeah.
Because the EU will have capital budgets and operational budgets. They will have capital procurement, so they will dictate what gets made and where and by who. There will be an impact.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, again, an absolute disaster. And by the way, a disaster financially for EU taxpayers paying for all of that, and then we'd be part of it. I mean, for me, Ukraine. Falklands. I mean, it all proved to me, why we need to have our own independent defence and security policy. And again, our closest allies when it comes to defence and security are actually, America, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, not the Europeans.
Exactly correct. So coming into your China argument that you've been having. So one of the critical systems that we've got at the moment in defence and security is called Skynet. No, don't laugh. It is actually called Skynet. So the new system, 6A, was originally purchased when Lovegrove was in the MOD from OneWeb, where we went in with them when they were already bankrupt. That OneWeb, so it's basically similar to what Musk has created with his lower Earth orbit satellites, with his system. So that's now been bought out by EU Telsat. Clue in the title, EU Telsat. So our critical defence system will be on the EU side because that's what they'll be using now. You ready for the kicker?
Yeah.
China has a stake in EU Telsat.
Brilliant.
Now, Julia,
brilliant.
You tell me, and ask Jonathan Powell, if you can get him on, the National Security Advisor, how do we retain any national security with that?
That's insane. David, fantastic call. Thank you so much. Really appreciate that. Sam Armstrong, just listening to that. I mean, this is the madness we're in the West. Just literally, China. Yeah, we're trying to keep it secure from countries like you. But sure, you can have a say in our satellites and our technology. And
totally and utterly penetrated. And it happened on our watch. It happened knowingly. We rolled out the red carpet to these
They didn't
people.
have to use spies.
No, George Osborne called it the golden era. He said we were going into this
George
great new
Osborne has a
period.
lot to answer for in terms of everything. Everything's going on. Don't worry, he's got a lovely new wife and kids, and he's raking it in. So it's all worked out fine for him. 12:36 is the time. Up next, we're going to take a quick break. Then we're going to be talking about the latest on the various wars that were ongoing around the country and around the world. Might be coming to this country. We're also going to be talking about train drivers and their brand new pay hike. This is Talk, the home of common sense.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
Very good afternoon to you. This is Talk, the home of common sense, with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer, still with me, Sam Armstrong. Let's talk right now about what is going on, not just in Syria, but also in Gaza as well, with Andrew Fawkes. He's a defence expert and research fellow at the Henry Jackson Society, also a former major in the Parachute Regiment. Very good afternoon to you, Andrew.
Good afternoon, Julia.
Thanks for joining us. Just want to talk first of all about Syria, because we understand that David Lammy, the Foreign Secretary, and his team have made diplomatic contact, we're told, with the rebels, this HTS group that are now basically running, as much of Syria as they got after the fall of the Assad regime. And we also know that some £50 million of humanitarian aid is being sent to Syria. First of all, I thought we weren't allowed to have talks with a proscribed terrorist group. And second of all, how do we know who's going to end up with this £50 million of aid?
I think we're in a place now where domestic legislation has run hard into international relations, realpolitik. It's a fact that HTS do run Damascus right now. And if we want to have any influence with them, we're going to have to find some way of talking to them. And I think that's what Mr. Lammy has done. And actually, I support it. Unusually for me with Mr. Lammy's decisions in the Middle East, I actually think he's made the right move here, because if we don't, somebody else will, and that somebody will be China, it'll be Russia, it'll be Iran if they can.
And we don't get to choose who are the leaders of these countries. The same with many of the countries we have to have dealings with. I thought it was rather a strange rule, but there is still chaos in Syria. A lot of people seem to be very optimistic. Well, Assad was awful, it can't be any worse. We saw after the fall of Gaddafi in Libya, we've seen after the fall of Saddam Hussein in Iraq, it can often get a lot worse.
It can, and we also saw what happens when HTS's precursor group, Islamic State, were running huge parts of Syria and northwest Iraq. Let's just say they're not very nice people. You may recall some of the headlines that happened around that 2014-15 time of people being burned alive and all kinds of human rights abuses. So there's huge potential here for this to go south very quickly, and actually I suspect it will. If I was a betting man, the optimist in me clings to the possibility that they might come to some sort of federated, negotiated settlement where Syria finds peace, but I suspect this is going to degenerate into warlords. I
have to say,
very quickly.
I was very optimistic of the Arab Spring, but actually I think what that taught us really is, that optimism is probably wildly misplaced. But obviously, lots of focus now of the British and the international media going into Syria has been on the awful crimes committed by the Assad regime, the mass imprisonment, mass torture, mass murder as well. There's no doubt going to be evidence of war crimes. It'd be interesting to see if there was actually an international arrest warrant going out for President Assad. Of course, he'll probably never leave Moscow. That won't ever be enacted, of course. But of course, we've had that focus on Israel over supposed accusations of genocide. An international arrest warrant issued for Benjamin Netanyahu on behalf for what's gone on in Gaza. But you've carried out a really interesting report at the Henry Jackson Society, looking at the number of deaths of civilians in Gaza, and with the only stats we've got, pretty much aren't any independent journalists allowed into the strip of land, and the only evidence we've really had has come really from the health ministry in Gaza, which after a little while BBC was persuaded to point out was the Hamas, the terrorist-run health ministry in Gaza. And these figures have been bandied about. I mean, they've just random numbers thrown about, but I think they've settled around the 40,000 odd mark in recent weeks of people who have died. But you've been looking at how many of those are actually civilians, and how many, the women and children we hear so much about, and how many of those are actually Hamas fighters.
Yeah, that's right. And we've had a really huge global media storm this weekend, which has been kind of fun. The people who wanted to read the report in good faith have taken it well, and those who don't have resorted to ad hominem attacks, and it's been really interesting. The key point for me, I think, is that if you break down the demographics of Hamas's own lists by proportion, it's overwhelmingly fighting-age males getting targeted. They were 26% of Gaza's population before the war, and since we look at the fatality lists, we're looking at 40, 45, 50, 60% by proportion.
And yet the impression we always get is that it's all women and children, and the images we get of crying people, horrific images of particularly children with horrible injuries, crying and screaming. Now, those images, you would be forgiven for thinking, and it would appear an awful lot of the people on the streets marching every 2 weeks would be forgiven for thinking that it was pretty much only Palestinian children who were dying in this war. But would you say categorically, based on Hamas's own figures, that's not the case?
Yeah, exactly. And that's that we were really careful not to kind of make assumptions, not to make wild conclusions. We've literally just looked at the data and interrogated it, and if you turn those numbers properly, it comes out in a far more balanced way than is reported by global media. And what's really interesting is that we worked with 50 Global, who are sort of about 50 different academics who've looked at media coverage over the last 14 months. And they found out that 98% of the world's media is using Hamas's figures, and only 5% are making the point that the IDF say they've killed 17,000+ Hamas and associated militants. So there's been a real global failure in journalistic standards over this conflict.
So that roughly half of those, IDF are pretty sure that roughly half of those that are claimed by the Palestinians are actually fighters, completely legitimate. But we also know, again, it's completely legitimate and terribly sad and awful that civilians will die in warfare, particularly when those Hamas fighters are using the civilians quite literally as human shields and hiding behind their hospitals, the camps, the schools and the apartment buildings. And again, even on the stats given out by Hamas, those stats in terms of the civilian deaths as a ratio of all deaths are still way better than any American or British army has ever achieved in any war.
Yeah, exactly that. And it gives you a really good idea of how skewed reporting on this is, that people try and claim Israeli humanitarian evacuations as somehow ethnic cleansing in some way. They're literally just moving civilians out of the way as they're under an international law duty to do. And it goes beyond their international law duty. I suspect if we in the West were fighting this war, civilian casualties would be vastly higher.
Yeah.
Now, that doesn't mean civilians aren't suffering. It doesn't mean civilians aren't dying. It doesn't mean that the damage in Gaza is horrific, because all of that is true.
Absolutely.
But what it means is that this is just a war, and it looks like every other urban war. It looks shocking and horrifying.
Yeah.
But to portray it as something other than just an urban war is deeply, deeply irresponsible.
Now, obviously, we've talked about, big world events there. Can I ask you also about what's going on with this Chinese spy? It looks like there's going to be a court hearing this afternoon at 2:00, where it's likely this H6, as is only allowed to be known in this country due to court order, that will be overturned. We'll find out officially in this country, although it's available on the internet, who this Chinese spy was, who's apparently been banned from the country and was a close confidant of Prince Andrew. How concerned are you that someone alleged to have been spying for a hostile nation state like China got so close to the royal family, went to Buckingham Palace, was able to get photographs with the two former prime ministers, David Cameron and Theresa May, and had such close links with, someone would say, Britain's favourite useless idiot, useless and useful idiot, Prince Andrew. How concerned are you about that as a defence security expert?
Spying is a feature of international relations and always has been. So we spy on people, they spy on us. That's just the nature of the game. What I think this shows for me is three things. First of all, it shows that Prince Andrew is rightly out of the public eye and out of royal duties. His judgment is clearly not as good as it should be to be playing that role. Secondly, it re-emphasises just how much strategic competition we are in with China and how they are actively trying to subvert and infiltrate us. But also, thirdly, I think it shows that our security services are doing a great job. The fact that they've identified and caught and removed this gentleman, that's a really good thing. And as far as I'm concerned, it's a win for the security services.
Yeah, wish they'd found him earlier, but there we are. Wonder how many more there are. Andrew Fox, really appreciate you joining us, Defence Expert, Research Fellow at the Henry Jackson Society. Thank you very much for that. Going to take a quick break right now. We're going to be back with Sam Armstrong. We're going to be also talking to Norman Baker, a former Transport Minister, about the train drivers getting another whopping great pay hike. I kid you not, of up to 75% just for agreeing to work at the weekends. You might expect that trains run at the weekends, you'd be expected to work weekends, but you're not expected to if you're a train driver. You just do it out of the goodness of your heart. Oh, we'll say out of the benefit to your wallet. We'll talk about that up next. This is Talk.
gave away, I think of the 1,750 odd licenses for fishing in the Channel, over 40% have gone to the European Union. They take a massive amount of fish out of our water already. And what Starmer said before he became Prime Minister, you might recall this, he was in Montreal, he thought he was off camera, and he said, if I were to become Prime Minister, I would align us so closely with the EU that people wouldn't even be able to tell whether or not we were members.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
Well, a very good afternoon to you. This is Talk, the home of common sense, with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. Sam Armstrong still with me. Sam, have you tried to get a train at a weekend lately?
Yeah, well, although I ended up on the, guess what, rail replacement bus service. Oh,
the most depressing words in the English language. 2 times now my mother has come to visit, or planned to come to visit, and the train's been up the spout on a Sunday because apparently train drivers don't want to work Sunday, so they cancel most of the trains, and the ones that do run are really, really busy. So if you're in your 80s, you perhaps don't want to be sitting on a train, well, hoping to sit on a train standing. You can't trust that people will give up their seat for someone, even in their 80s these days. Yeah, I've been out in Britain. But extraordinarily, ministers have handed train driver union barons, that's what this copy says, a 75% pay hike for doing overtime. Transport Secretary, the brand new one, who doesn't have the criminal conviction, is the Transport Secretary, Heidi Alexander. She's going to allow hundreds of drivers to get £580 to work a single overtime shift between Monday and Friday, and £600 at weekends. So that's a heck of a lot more than they would normally get, but they're going to get that massive big sum. The deal's going to apply to 800 drivers who work for West Midlands Trains. They run services under the London North Western Railway and the West Midlands Railway brands. I hope they start doing that for the GWR, so you can get some trains to and from the West Country as well. But let's talk about this with Norman Baker. He's a former Transport Minister and former Lib Dem MP. Very good afternoon to you, Norman. What do you make of this massive pay hike for train drivers to work weekends, even though, of course, we know that trains need to run at weekends?
Well, I recognise 2 things. One is that Mick Whelan, who runs ASLEF, is an extremely competent and intelligent advocate for his members and does very well for them. Secondly, that this is a reflection of the out-of-date terms and conditions which are applied in railway since the First World War, when Sundays were entirely different days to which they are now, and the terms and conditions haven't been updated. And unfortunately,
they work a 4-day week, don't they? Aren't they on basically 70k for a 4-day week?
Yeah, near enough. And it's a fantastic job in that sense. I'm sure many of us would like to get extra paid weekends. I don't get extra paid weekends, and I'm sure you don't either. But the reality is this is a consequence of privatisation, actually, because at privatisation, before that day, British Rail paid all their drivers the same thing. And after privatisation, all companies were competing with each other to get drivers. And, of course, there was a shortage of drivers in that sense. And companies themselves wanted to get overtime out of drivers because it was cheaper to get overtime than it was to train new drivers, who takes a year or 2 years.
So at the time, it seemed like a good idea. But this is the thing. I don't mind people getting extra money to work on the Sunday with family time. I get that. But you take on certain jobs, like, if you work in healthcare, you've got to accept, of course, you're going to have to work some weekends. I worked on a Sunday paper for years. I didn't go, I'm not working on a Saturday. You do a breakfast show. You expect to get up early. Those are the deals. But the idea that our railway service should be working on a basis that people only have to work 4 days, Monday to Friday, 4 of those days, and that they, as a special act, the goodness of their heart, if they fancy some extra holiday cash, they'll agree to work weekends. So we're a first world country, and you routinely can't rely on getting a train at the weekend anymore. I mean, it damages, people's family get-togethers. It damages people's businesses because people might plan, we're going to go, go into Manchester or Liverpool or London. We're going to have a big day out. We're going to spend some money in the shops, go to the theatre. Cancel the whole thing because they can't get a sodding train.
It's been exacerbated since Brexit, since COVID, because since COVID, what's happened is the makeup of the passengers on the network has changed. There are fewer commuters now, Monday to Friday, going to work. there are more people using trains for leisure on Saturday and Sunday. The numbers of people on trains at weekends has increased quite significantly. And this is where the growth market is for the railways. It's for leisure travel.
So they're making it harder.
Yeah, the terms and conditions haven't caught up with that. Neither, by the way, have Network Rail where their engineering works, because they should be not having engineering works to Sunday. Sunday is not a dead day anymore. They should be having them perhaps on a Monday when people can... have one day working at home.
It seems to be. I mean, I have to say, I always notice it's much quieter on a Monday than any other day when I'm going to work. But this is the thing, it's just so frustrating. I just think most people are just thinking, they wonder why people don't want to use the railways, why people stick in their cars. Most people don't have an option of getting a train to or from work. They have to use their car anyway. But, because they need to know the journey is reliable, so people don't book. They just don't book it because they just discount it. You only have to have one massively disrupted journey. And I can think of virtually no time when I've had to leave London at the weekend in the last 2 years when it's not been massively disrupted or had to be cancelled. And people just go, that's it. It only has to happen a couple of times, and then they go back on the roads.
Well, they do. I mean, to be honest with you, many of the railway services we run in this country do work quite well. But they're subject to rail engineering works which are held at the wrong time. They're subject to weather events, which seem to me to be extraordinary in terms of the effect they have on trains. A weather event, call it a weather event, leaves in a line or whatever, affects electric trains more than diesel trains. Diesel trains do get through more quickly and more assiduously on the network. And, of course, we're moving towards electrification, which is right environmentally, but it does mean trains are more vulnerable.
Yeah. Can I ask you, can I say, Norman, I'm going to interrupt because I've only got a couple of minutes, 1 minute left, really. I want to just get in on something else. Now, you're also the author, we've spoken to you many times about royal family stories, the author of And What Do You Do? What the royal family don't want you to know. It's really about the royal family's finances, that book. But what do you make of Prince Andrew in the news for all the wrong reasons, yet again, over yet another very poor judgment of friendship, that one of his closest business confidants, we are told, for 10 years was actually an alleged Chinese spy. What do you make of that?
Well, my book, of course, is a chapter called The Grand Old Duke of Sleaze, which is entirely about Prince Andrew. Look, I mean, it's very clear, isn't it, Julia? I mean, he wants money because he hasn't got any. He hasn't got enough money now to support this extravagant lifestyle, this huge house he's in. And the Chinese want influence with the British establishment and to find out what's going on. It's very simple. I mean, that's the deal.
Yeah.
All we need to know is how much money he has received from the Chinese.
Do you think money will have changed hands? And do you think we'll find out if it has?
I think it's most likely it's changed hands. Can't prove it, of course. So there's a caveat there, I suppose. But the reality is that he was desperate. That's a word that was used in the internal documentation. Seized from this spy. That he was desperate. If he's desperate, he'll do whatever he has to do to keep money.
Yeah, that's the worry. We know, again, going to Jeffrey Epstein and asking him for money, he was already a convicted paedophile. I mean, goodness me. Norman Baker, former Transport Minister, thank you very much indeed for that. Sam Armstrong, I mean, that's a very fair point, isn't it, about Prince Andrew?
Well, look, we know he has been very short of a bob or two for all too long.
He's not. He's a very, very wealthy man. He just doesn't have a job.
Well, and the King has started charging him rent for his palace in the Windsor estate.
Yeah, it's not a house, is it? I mean, it's got 26 bedrooms or something
and that's
ridiculous.
led him to these extraordinary